Summit, the path to CMMC Level 2, hosted by Exostar. I am today's host, Kim Peterson, Senior Director of Marketing with Exostar. We have a lot of content to get through today, so we're going to get started quickly. We are thrilled to have you all join us today. We've got a great lineup scheduled for the day, full of speakers and sessions from across the defense industrial base to help us all better understand what it takes to prepare for and achieve CMMC Level 2. So how is today going to work? Following our keynote, the sessions will run one right after another on this link, and we'll pause for a few short breaks between sessions. We encourage you throughout the day to submit questions. You'll see it on your console page. And as time allows in each session, we will answer as many questions as we can. This event is being recorded, and we will share the recording after. And throughout the day, please take a second to check out the resources in the resources portion of your page. There are things like an ebook, a link to a CMMC resource center, and an SMB survival guide. Let's get this started and kick it off. Our keynote today is the evolving cybersecurity landscape and the road to CMMC Level 2, moderated by Wade Jones, CISO of Exostar. Joining Wade today, we are pleased to welcome Jason Anderson from Boeing, who leads their DFARS CMMC PMO and enterprise compliance efforts, and Patrick Thornton from Lockheed Martin, supporting information assurance and cybersecurity initiatives. Let's get this started. Welcome, Wade.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everybody. We're excited to be here today in this summit. It's great to see such a big group of strong leaders, practitioners, and partners gathered here today to talk about CMMC. So, wherever you are on your CMMC journey, this summit is about clarity. Clarity on the requirements, on expectations, on how to move forward with confidence. CMMC is here, and it's really shaping how we talk about CUI and securing the DIB. So beyond compliance, CMMC is really about trust that with our government partners, our customers, and in the systems we rely on every day. And importantly, this conversation must include the suppliers, those mid and small size businesses that are the backbone of our industry. They often face the greatest challenges in CMMC, but are also the ones that are doing the most advanced research and development and innovation. So ensuring this, we really try to ensure that this has practical, scalable paths to compliance that can be successful for all the supply chain. So today's an opportunity to learn, to share practical insights, and we brought together experts that have that practical insights, that have done assessments, that have been on the ground in the real world situations. So I encourage you to really engage and connect and take full advantage of the conversations. So thank you again for being here. And so I'm excited that Jason and Pat are here with me today. They bring unique experiences. Not only do they secure and work security and CMMC for their own enterprises, but they both represent big supply bases. And so they have a lot of experience working with suppliers. And so we're excited to hear from both of you. So why don't we kick it off with Jason? Why don't you start and share your introductory remarks and insights, and then we'll go directly to Pat. And then after you guys are both done, we'll do a little bit of Q&A. So thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Wade. Happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. I thought I would share a little bit about the why is this important, and then maybe a little bit about the evolution of how we got here. For those that are on this call, you probably know there are absolutely nation-state threat actors that are trying to infiltrate from a cybersecurity standpoint your systems. If you're in the defense industrial base, they are trying to get at your systems and, importantly, get after controlled unclassified information, CUI, which is sensitive and it does require protection. Because of all of that, and there is a focus on getting access to that data, and we need to protect. The government did issue back in 2017 the DFARS 252-204-7012 clause. I think a lot of you are familiar with that, but that was the intro of, hey, NIST 800-171 compliance. You got to do this for protection of CUI. And I think we all agreed, yep, we need to do that. And as you know, as a prime contractor, we started flowing down that clause and gathering, hey, are you sure you're doing that to our supply chain? Are you following the NIST 800-171? We gather that stuff, have that discussion. Well, the evolution of assurance in the contracting world turned into, at some point, the DoD decided, well, is everyone actually following those cybersecurity requirements of the NIST 800-171? And in 2019, they put together the DCMA DIBCAC. So again, my apologies for all the acronyms. It's the world we live in, but you know, the DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cyber Assessment Center, they got established and they started going around checking, are people doing 800-171 compliance? And as you can imagine, there was a lot of variance around there. And so they found a number of issues, and all of these cyber controls, again, it was after contract award. You'd win the contract, you'd all celebrate, you'd issue your contracts, subcontracts, and everyone would agree, we'll do cybersecurity after the fact. Well, because of all these findings, the DoD and now the DOW, they said, we need to flip the script a little bit, and we need to, how do we assure cybersecurity compliance on the front end? And that's really how CMMC was created, was to make sure before contract award, how have you proven that you're actually meeting the NIST 800-171, and you know, so that you're actually compliant enough to handle CUI. And so that's a bit of like how we got here. It's not easy, but it is absolutely important. And I'll just say that if you are following the NIST 800-171, it really does provide a lot of risk reduction, risk remediation, cybersecurity support to your organization. So it's not just a check the box mentality, and I'm sure we'll get into that. Looking forward to the questions and answers, and happy to be here. Thanks.
All right, and it turns out I owed Jason $20 because he got through all the acronym soup and the number references, and so that takes the sting out of this for me. I don't need to remember that stuff. I'd really just reinforce a lot of the comments that he made. CMMC really started not long after we got to a DFARS on cyber that really set the framework and foundation for a common approach to how we do cybersecurity. But it was those three problems that we were running into. We were continuing to see cyber compromises across the DIB. We had a one-size-fits-all when we really don't have a one-size industry. We have small players, we have mid-sized players, and we have very large primes. And so having one standard didn't make a lot of sense at the time. And then that self-attestation, there's a lot of reliance on companies understanding the requirements so that they can accurately assess their control landscape and accurately report their ability to protect CUI data. And it turns out that's not always the case. And so a lot of what we focus on from the prime perspective is helping everyone understand the complexity of the requirements. And as we look control by control, how do we implement those controls in a rigorous way where it's comprehensive across the environment? Because our adversaries are constantly testing and looking for that one entry point that maybe you forgot that control in one area, and that's going to be the spot where they can get a foothold into the environment. And so CMMC is meant to externalize that assessment and drive a third-party review with objectivity and external understanding of appropriate approaches to the controls, and certify so that companies are no longer self-attesting that they're meeting the controls. For me, I always chuckle when I hear someone say, oh, we're bringing in Pat, he's an expert in CMMC, because there is still so much unknown about how CMMC is going to roll out and how we're going to find those common best practices as an industry. And a lot of this is going to be worked through from an implementation perspective together. And so like Jason, that's where I'm very excited to hear the questions. because I'll share with you, I describe myself as a Lockheed Martin lifer. I started with Lockheed Martin directly out of college. I've been here 24 years now, most of that time in cybersecurity, and I've been there with CMMC from the inception. But that limits my perspective. And so hearing the questions from you all about what your experiences are is always helpful for me to reflect on how we're going to drive good approaches for our vast supply chain and really help up-level the entire defense industrial base to meet the threat that, as Jason said, it's right in front of us. We see it every day.
All right, guys. Well, hey, thanks for those introductory remarks and those insights. We very much appreciate it. So let's kind of jump in. We got some questions that were submitted before. Let me start on the policy side, because the number soup that came out originally is confusing to a lot of people. And so we got a question about, okay, well, how is this CMMC thing related to NIST 800-171, and then what do I do with DFAR 7012? Maybe Pat, we'll start with you, and then Jason, you can clean up as needed.
Yeah, and welcome the support on it. From my end, I think one of the great positives as we sort of evolved CMMC from where it was with the first release, and then we got into the 2.0 and the restructuring around 3 levels. Basically, if you are targeting CMMC Level 2 maturity level, that means you're going to be able to process controlled unclassified information on contracts. The good news to you is that the control requirements are exactly the same as NIST 800-171 revision 2. And so it's the 110 controls that we've been living with since late 2017 when that DFARS 7012 was released. And so these should be familiar things. And from the DOW's perspective, one of their struggles is they hear a lot about how difficult it is for companies to get to a level 2 certification. And the response is, well, I thought you've been doing this for 8 or 9 years now. And so that is again, double-edged sword, in that it's good news in that these controls should be familiar to us, and they've been on contracts pretty persistently from 2017 onward. And so it's the same standards that we've been accustomed to meeting. It's just the certification will come from an external party instead of internally.
Yeah, I think Pat did a great job covering that. The only additional thing I would say is that one of the difficulties with CMMC, though, is it did, while it's the exact same requirements, it did raise the bar on there's a minimum threshold. So I think that's something that, as you get familiar with CMMC Level 2, is that you do have to get 88 of those 110 at a minimum, to get your CMMC certification. And that's one of the, and then there's only certain controls that you're able to put on a POAM. It would only be those 1-pointers, et cetera. So, I think it's important to make sure that you spend the time reaching out to the resources that have the expertise if you don't have it in-house. And there's a ton of resources that are out there to learn and get up to speed on it.
Perfect. Great answers. Thank you. So the second question kind of talks, you guys have talked about CMMC Level 2, and we had a lot of questions about, well, what level of CMMC do I need and when do I need to certify by? Jason, you want to start with that one?
Sure. So currently, the CMMC, the 48 CFR, I should stop using acronyms, but the CMMC requirement came out in November 10th of just this last year. So we're about 6 months or so into this. And they said, so that is phase 1, and they are targeting CMMC Level 2 self-assessment. So for a CMMC Level 2, there are 2 separate certification paths. You can either go self-assessment, or you have to get a third-party assessment where you hire a third-party assessment organization, and they come in and they verify. So they are trying to adopt a phased implementation approach. So if your contract has a CMMC clause, then you are going to be required to meet whatever that the requirement is on the contract. The DOW is saying that they would target only self-assessment at this point. But even that, I would say that I think the DOW is realizing the defense industrial base as a whole is not quite ready yet. So I don't think we're seeing as many CMMC requirements come through as we will eventually. My suggestion, though, is absolutely pursue your CMMC level 2 at self-certification at a minimum. But I do think that come this November, they're saying they're going to start issuing C3PAO, CMMC Level 2 certified third-party assessment requirements. And I do believe that eventually, in the end, the vast majority of people handling CUI will have that third-party assessment requirement.
Yeah, well said. Pat, anything to add there?
Everything is accurate from our experience there. As a prime contractor, we have thousands of active contracts, and I would say at this point we just have a small handful that have a CMMC, and at this point it's only a self-attestation requirement. We do expect that will ramp up as we see additional maturity in the CMMC program. And I think the guidance there is spot on. That says the number one thing that you could be doing is making sure that your 171 Rev 2 controls are where they need to be in order to get certified. Conduct your self-assessment, do your self-attestation in the DOW SPURS system, and that sets you up for the first phase of CMMC. The requirements will get turned up from there, but it all comes down to the contract side of the equation. And so that's where the first part of uncertainty comes in. When will you see a CMMC requirement? We can only say soon, because it will depend on the timeline of the phased rollout of CMMC and the timeline of the contracts that you're receiving, when they will be seeing that requirement applied.
Okay, well said. And the last part of that discussion on the contracts may lead right into this next piece. We need to get a question about what is CUI, and more importantly, how do I even know I have it? Pat, you want to take that?
Yeah, this is a challenge that we struggle with across our contracts, because the difficulty is the same on the contractor side as it is on the DOW side. And so how do you identify controlled unclassified information? And really comes down to working with either your prime contractor or your customer to make sure that you're reinforcing the expectations that that data needs to be labeled when you receive it, so that you can properly identify it as it flows throughout your systems. You should be working with your security classification guide to understand the types of information that fall into the CUI category. But I always recommend, working with your contracting officer, working with your customer or prime representatives to get clarification. Ask the question, because it is difficult, even on a good day, for us to internally identify what types of data we are handling. And so any help that we can get from clarity up front, appropriate labeling of information, that's going to give us a leg up.
Yeah, well said. Jason, anything for you?
Yeah, I totally agree. Spot on. There's a tongue-in-cheek acronym for CUI that I recently heard, that it's can't usually identify. And so it is challenging. So I do have some empathy for that, because even on our side, and sometimes, and we'll try to work with the customer, and a lot of times the customer says, you know what, everything with this program is going to be CUI, because they feel that it is that sensitive, and they want to protect, they want to ensure the confidentiality of the data. I would say, for people that say, well, how do I know if I have CUI? One of the other indicators you might use is if you've been getting the 70-12 clause flowed to you from a prime or from, that's a pretty high indicator that you're getting some CUI because you're being told you have to protect CUI. So we have had some cases where people want to say, well, I don't have any CUI because they don't want to deal with the CMMC clause. But a lot of times it's there. So anyways, that's just a little bit of something to check on.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. So I love these. We have like 5 minutes left, and I love these last two. And so I'm going to start with this, and I hope we get both of them. So, what are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing companies make as you work with your partners and suppliers, or whoever? Pat, or I guess Jason, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I would say one of the biggest mistakes that we see is under preparing and just expecting, hey, you know what, we can just order a pizza, show up for a weekend and knock this out and get this done. It's not going to go like that. It does require preparation. If you haven't been along a strong cybersecurity maturity journey, it's going to be a much heavier lift. But and then I would say not using the resources that are out there to help you get through a self-assessment, like looking at the CMMC Level 2 assessment guide and actually stepping through that. There's just a lot of really good resources. So if you try to go on your own, if you haven't been, following this along, it's been going for a number of years. I think that's one of the key things where I see people struggle.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
Yeah, and I'll add on from a resourcing perspective. One of the areas where Lockheed's a big contributor and very strong believer in the ND-ISAC Cyber Assist program. And so a ton of resources out there. Hopefully we can get the link shared out for everyone. But in terms of the mistakes, definitely agree there's a lead time and there will be more work put into the preparation of a successful certification than in the actual assessment itself. But in terms of mistakes, I go back to some of the primary drivers of why are we doing CMMC? And the number one thing is we want to protect CUI, and we continue to see cyber adversaries that are successful in targeting DIB companies to get data. And so the number one way that happens in our experience and what we see is that a company thinks they have an effective control. They think, oh yeah, I've got multi-factor authentication, so anytime you VPN into my company, you got to use a secure token. But they forget, I'm on M365 and my email is single-factor authentication, or maybe it's using a phishable multi-factor authentication like an SMS text. And those are the small cracks that the adversaries are finding and gaining a foothold. And so when you think about the controls and how you need to implement them for your environment, make sure you're focusing comprehensively across your IT landscape and that you've got all bases covered for each of those controls.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right, let's end up with this last one. Can we outsource CMMC compliance?
I'll start. You can get help for sure. And so using a managed security provider is a great way to take some of the burden off uplifting your control landscape. But I liken that to leveraging a SaaS environment or a provider where there's still going to be a shared responsibility that comes into play. And there are going to be processes and procedures that you're going to be accountable for. And so it's not an easy button. There's no simple path to say someone else is going to take care of CMMC for me. There's always going to be a role that falls on that environment owner, that system owner that's signing up to the contract requirement.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any closing words on that, Jason?
No, I was just going to 100% agree. I mean, CMMC is heavily policy based, and those policies, they have to be owned by your company. So you can't fully outsource. You're not going to be able to just write a check and just say, hey, someone else take care of all of this for me. But I think it is very helpful to partner with some people that can help you on the journey. And there's a lot of resources. So there's definitely augmentation, but you're not going to be able to just completely outsource it.
Yeah, well said. So Jason and Pat, we're so excited to have you here, and we're excited to go through this full day and for the next presenters. So we believe our time is up. So
thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks everybody.
We really appreciate you, Wade, Jason, and Patrick, especially answering some of those questions we hear frequently asked. So thank you for that. We are going to keep it moving right along to our first session. The next one up is Protect Your Contracts, Building a Compliant Enclave, moderated by Kevin Hancock, Director of Solution Consulting and Customer Success with Exostar. And he is joined today by Douglas Berry of Synertex, who has led his organization through CMMC Level 2 compliance and secure environment design. Welcome, Kevin and Douglas.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kim. Welcome everybody. And hey, I'm impressed. It's early and we're still ahead of time, so that's great. Doug, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. So I'm going to start just by asking Doug to introduce himself and a little bit about his company, Synertex.
Sure. So I'm Doug Berry. I'm the Director of Information Security and Strategic Programs at Synertex. I am affectionately referred to as our CEO's Swiss Army knife. So I do kind of a lot of things, but it made sense, I suppose, as I did a lot of work on process definition, process maturity, to also, in parallel with that, work on our InfoSec program. So those two things actually are going to be something that I talk about this morning, how those two things working together and in concert is really important to actually achieving a compliant enclave to protect CUI.
Great. Thanks, Doug. So, Doug, I'm going to let you present, and I will go ahead and advance the slides as you go through, because we know this is a touchy platform. So if you just let me know when you want me to advance, we'll go ahead and get started.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So today I want to talk a little bit about something that I think a lot of organizations across the defense industrial base are wrestling with. And that's basically, how do you achieve a compliant enclave that actually supports your business rather than slowing it down? What I'm going to share is not theoretical. It's also not overly technical. It's based on our journey implementing and operating a compliant enclave while pursuing things like alignment with the NIST 800-171 requirements, certification of our InfoSec program under the ISO 27001 standard, and then preparing for and actually getting through a CMMC Level 2 C3PAO assessment. If there's one overarching theme throughout this presentation, it's this. I think that compliance works best when security and operations really are designed together, or you're developing and maturing them together rather than separately. So let's start with what the core problem is that many organizations, I think, are facing and what they're trying to solve. Next slide, please.
So I'm on the problem we're solving. Is that the right one, Doug?
That is the right one. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Sorry about that. I'm
no problem.
Looking at at the same time. So over the last several years, we've really seen, I think, an exponential increase in at least the mention of CUI handling requirements across federal contracts. I'm seeing them more and more now. I think coming out in an unplanned way, the inclusion of that acronym at the bottom of a page. We saw that just a week or so ago. That suddenly meant that we had to treat solicitation as CUI and handle it and safeguard it accordingly. But really, what I've seen is that with this increase in CUI and the mention of it, a lot of organizations are trying to respond by securing everything and securing it equally. And that probably comes from a place of good intention. There's some unintended consequences when you try to do that. Suddenly, you've got more systems that are in scope. You've got more users that are impacted. You've got costs that go up dramatically. You have, if not done correctly, frustration coming from your users, and you really run the risk of slowing down operations to a point where the operations are no longer effective. So let me give an example of that. With solicitations specifically, that's where we actually see a lot of our CUI. If my safeguarding of the CUI that is part of a solicitation is so, shall we say, complicated that our proposal development shop can't respond to a solicitation in the time frame that the government has set for it, well, then operations literally, have been undermined by InfoSec, and that's kind of what you want to try to avoid. Really, what happens is that compliance starts feeling like a burden rather than an enabler, and it really should be an enabler, right? You should be able to operate efficiently, effectively, and do so in a way that is secure, that doesn't put CUI at risk. So one of the biggest lessons that we learned was that the goal shouldn't be to protect everything everywhere all at once. It was really to intentionally control CUI where it lives. And that distinction kind of changed everything for us architecturally, operationally, and even financially. And it led us to, I think, a very different philosophy about enclave design. Next slide, please. So what was that, right? That philosophy became one where we said, look, let's control the boundary, not the chaos around the boundary, all the things that are outside of scope. So instead of chasing CUI across every endpoint, every team site, every email attachment, every workflow, we focused on containing it. We asked ourselves, where should it exist? Where should it not exist? And then how do we enforce that consistently? And I think the more you minimize where CUI exists, the more manageable your environment becomes. It affects a number of things. It affects your audit scope, for example. It affects risk exposure, user management. It simplifies monitoring. It facilitates incident response if you were to have an incident. And then ultimately, I think it reduces cost. So a well-designed enclave really shrinks the problem and the problem space dramatically. And that kind of became the foundation of our approach, and is going to be what I talk about on the rest of my presentation. So how do you actually accomplish that in practice? Next slide, please. Really what you want to do, and I say this, is minimize scope ruthlessly, right? So it's probably the most important slide in the entire presentation, right? Scope is the biggest cost driver in CMMC, we found, and in enclave management as well. Every additional device that you have, every additional user that is deemed in scope, every workflow that you have to accommodate, every application that you have to support that touches or that could potentially touch CUI or be exposed to CUI, every storage location, all of those things create additional complexity and consequently additional risk. So our approach was to very aggressively reduce the scope wherever possible. And what that meant was keeping CUI inside the enclave and conversely keeping everything else out of the enclave, preventing local storage of CUI, reducing email sprawl, avoiding uncontrolled collaboration tools, and then making sure that, wherever possible, that we stress the use of browsers and had browser-based access wherever it was feasible. And the key idea behind that was that if the CUI never leaves the enclave, then the exposure decreases and can decrease dramatically. And I think even more importantly, and I guess this is the part that probably everybody is dreading, and that we certainly dreaded as well, is, what's our audit story? When an auditor comes and looks at our environment, how do we make our story cleaner around our enclave and easier to defend? And so to support that strategy, the architecture really has to reinforce those decisions that we made around where we keep and where we handle CUI. Next slide, please. So from an architectural perspective, we realized that centralization really is the way to go. We wanted to make sure that we had appropriate controls, the strongest controls actually that we could have around the boundary of the enclave, rather than distributed inconsistently, I'm sorry, across a bunch of different systems and endpoints. We focused on centralized cloud services with strong identity controls, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, logging and monitoring, basically all the things that you are required to have as a part of the standard. And then also made sure that everything was session-based and wherever it was possible. And the point there was to minimize data persistence on the endpoints. We wanted to literally, and I think we succeeded, pulling endpoints out of scope. They become more like controlled access points, if you will, dumb terminals rather than storage locations. In fact, we prohibit the storage locally of CUI. And it doesn't eliminate all the risk, but it does reduce it significantly and make the environment much easier to manage and audit. And I think this is where modern enclave approaches really shine, and especially if they're implemented correctly. But it's important to remember that technology alone is not enough. Next slide, please. So what do I mean by that? So one of the most overlooked aspects of security around an enclave is organizational authority. And I've kind of looked at and wrestled with this challenge of responsibility, without authority, from a number of different perspectives over the years. But in the case of protecting CUI, you can build the best architecture in the world, but if you don't have policies in place that are backed up by your executive leadership and aren't enforced consistently, your users are going to find workarounds eventually. And that kind of underscores the need to develop your InfoSec program, develop your secure enclave, your operational processes in concert with your business processes. The thing that I always try to keep in the back of my mind is that as soon as I allowed one exception, a couple of things would happen, or a number of things would happen. Certainly the scope would expand, right? Because now the enclave wasn't the sole place where CUI exists. My controls really weakened because any place where I allowed an exception to happen, odds are I've not gone through the rigor to ensure that we have all 110 controls in place in that location. Audit risk increases because if an auditor says, well, you granted an exception on this date, why? And let me take a look at, the details of that exception. So there's some risk around that. And then really what happens is if the more you do that, the more you allow exceptions, the more your enclave really stops being an enclave, right? So leadership backing on this is absolutely critical. Your policies have to support your architecture decisions, and leadership has to support your policy enforcement. So I've used this one phrase internally. If users can move CUI outside your enclave whenever it's inconvenient, you don't really have an enclave. All you really have is a suggestion. And that typically gets a laugh, but it is true. Which kind of leads me to another important lesson that we learned. Next slide.
Doug,
CMMC,
if you don't mind me interrupting you just 1 second. I'm
sure.
sorry. Would you mind coming on camera? I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I've been thinking that my camera was on the entire time.
Yeah, no problem. I thought it was on there for a minute and then it just there. Perfect. Thank you, sir.
All right. My apologies, guys. And my apologies for having to look at me. But kind of getting back to what I was saying. So one thing that is really important is, you should not view CMMC as the starting point or even as the destination of your InfoSec journey, of your security program. If anything, it's a validation of the maturity of your InfoSec program. And I think a lot of organizations that struggle trying to implement compliance requirements do so because they really don't have an operational InfoSec foundation. For us, it was really critical that we aligned with 800-171. It's a contractual requirement on a number of things. Did my video go off again?
It did.
I'm
I
s-
have no idea why.
I don't know. I didn't touch anything. I swear. I'm going to leave my hands up here so you can see. But for us, I think that it was essential that we aligned with 800-171. We wanted to have an InfoSec program that operated consistently, that we could demonstrate to an auditor, that we could teach if I got hit by a bus or won the lottery to someone because it was properly documented. All these things we wanted to have there we go again. We wanted to have a governance structure that supported that program, and we wanted to continuously improve it. I'm not going to mess with my video button again. I apologize.
I agree, Doug. That's fine.
It's live. I was going to say television, but it's not even television. Anyway, so with all these things that we wanted that were critical for us, right, to achieve through an InfoSec program, we realized that processes really can't live in people's heads, right? So if your environment depended entirely on, an individual, historical knowledge, things of that nature, that really creates an operational risk as well as an audit weakness. So your enclave really needs to be supported by repeatable processes, process documentation, control documentation, and practices that are sustainable. But once you have that foundation, at that point, risk management really becomes much more practical. So let's talk about risk management for a second. Next slide, please. One thing that I want to point out is that just realize that not all risks are created equal, right? And risk management really means understanding what threatens the confidentiality, what threatens integrity, what threatens availability, and where are your greatest exposures, right? Where do those things truly exist? For example, data leakages, unauthorized access, endpoint exposure, all of those things, they're meaningful risks in most enclave environments. The goal isn't to blindly implement every control everywhere. It really needs to be applying the right controls to your environment where the risk exists and where the controls matter most. Auditors are gonna be looking for evidence that you understand your environment and that you're managing your risks intentionally, right? It's not just a checkbox activity. And I think, so having gone through an audit, we had an auditor that had done a handful of these already. So I think, was really kind of coming into his own, but I think he could tell, or he would be able to tell the difference between those two things very, very quickly, whether it's a checkbox activity or whether you're really intentionally managing your risk. But let's talk about the next point, which is that even good controls can fail if your operational environment is ignored. All right, next slide, please. So what a lot of InfoSec organizations and teams will forget, I found, is that the organization that they're trying to secure, or the enclave they're trying to put in place to secure CUI, that is used by functional teams like human resources or proposal development or whatever it might be, those other outside organizations, they still have a job to do. And if your enclave slows them down too much, or inhibits collaboration, or creates friction, or makes the work in any way unnecessarily difficult, the users are going to start to try to find shortcuts. And once that happens, you've kind of created a security problem as well as a compliance problem. One of our biggest goals was making the enclave support the mission rather than, I guess, become an impediment to it. We wanted to make sure that collaboration was able to happen securely. We wanted to make sure that people still had access to the right tools, or the tools that they needed to perform their functions. We wanted to make sure that when we had workflows that needed to be designed, we designed them intentionally and in a complementary way, rather than in a way that kind of conflicted with other operational workflows. And we wanted to make sure that we reduced any unnecessary friction wherever possible. To that end, we actually did include our functional groups in a weekly session to define the business processes that they performed, and then built the InfoSec program alongside that in parallel. I guess one thing that I want to make sure is that I kind of get across is that good security architecture should support operations. Okay, it shouldn't compete with operations. Unfortunately, I think this is where a lot of organizations stumble. So let's talk about some common pitfalls. All right, most enclave failures aren't caused by technical limitations. I've found they're usually caused by operational decisions. So what are some examples? You overscope your environment until everything becomes CUI, right? Well, you don't need to do that. You want to make sure that, well, first of all, it's not for us to categorize something as CUI. Only the government can do that. So don't treat things as CUI just because you think they might be CUI. Determine if the government has categorized something as CUI, then treat it as such. Another common pitfall, I talked about this earlier, allowing exceptions just this once. If my CEO were to come to me and say, hey, I'm going to my beach house for the weekend. I don't have connectivity there. I'm working on something that requires CUI. Can you let me download it just this once? I would be very hard pressed to say yes, even at the risk of unemployment. Another pitfall, weak policy enforcement. All right. You have to be draconian about this. All right. Policies exist for a reason, and that reason is to maintain compliance with the CMMC standard. Another pitfall, treating endpoints as inherently trusted. Right. Unless you've locked those endpoints down, unless you can manage them and are managing them and monitoring them to the standard, don't treat endpoints as inherently trusted. And then I guess kind of like the last pitfall that I would warn folks against is ignoring the user experience entirely. Make your users, make the people that are affected by your InfoSec program feel like they're stakeholders in it. Explain to them why it's important. Explain to them why it's required. Explain to them why you're doing the things that you're doing, and try to figure out a way that works for both of you. For you as the InfoSec executive to remain compliant, and for them, the business process owner, to still be able to do their business process without any undue difficulty. What happens, I think, over time is that complexity builds faster in organizations that don't recognize these pitfalls and don't manage them, right? And then that complexity builds faster than you can actually manage it. The environment becomes harder to secure, harder to monitor, harder to audit. But I think the good news is that you really can avoid these pitfalls, and it's fairly easy just through deliberate planning and governance. What does success look like? Let's talk about that for a second. So a successful enclave tends to share, I think, some common characteristics. You've got a very clearly defined boundary for your CUI, and everybody understands what's inside, what's not inside, and how that data inside is handled. I think another common characteristic of a successful enclave is that the number of in-scope assets is minimized intentionally, right? You want to reduce the number of things that you have to manage unless you've got an unlimited budget. And even then, I would recommend against it. You want to make sure that you have identity and access controls, that they're strong and that they're consistently enforced. And I think probably one of the final common characteristics would be that you've got very strong audit visibility and traceability. The thing I always say is that a good enclave really should be nearly invisible to your user, but plainly visible to your auditor. And if users can work effectively and auditors can clearly see control enforcement, you're in a really, really good place. Let me wrap up with, I guess what the biggest lessons were that we learned in our CMMC journey. I think first it was, again, minimize scope aggressively, design with real operations in mind. So don't do that in a vacuum. Do it in collaboration with your operational teams. Build on top of a mature InfoSec foundation. All right, you want to have a program that you can sustain. that you can talk about, that is documented, that's repeatable, where you have evidence of its execution, where you can measure processes within your InfoSec program, improve upon them, and then centralize control, I think, wherever possible, and enforce your policies consistently without exception. And if you do that, and you've aligned your security practices and your operational processes properly, then compliance really becomes, I think, much simpler and very much sustainable. I think that where a lot of organizations are headed as the defense industrial base continues maturing around CMMC expectations is something like that, an adoption of a collaborative business operation and InfoSec program. So let me just I want to share a couple of things, I guess, about our CMMC journey. I guess the way it kind of took place. We realized about three and a half years ago, CMMC is coming, even though there was a lot of consternation about what should it look like, when should it come out, who should be subject to it. But we realized that anything that was going to happen was going to be built on NIST 800-171. So we started working on implementing controls, that control set. We also realized that we wanted sustainability, so we did pursue certification against an information security standard, specifically ISO 27001, and then eventually started working towards compliance with CMMC, building an enclave that we could effectively secure and then defend in an audit. And it really kind of helped us and in some ways forced us to understand our business operations better. We brought all those pieces together, our operations team, our InfoSec team, IT, leadership, recruiting, program management, and kind of made them all stakeholders in the process. And that I think was, for me, kind of the summary of the entire process. We did a lot of things that you would expect. We evaluated a number of tools, we refined workflows, we built governance, and we managed change, and then eventually went through our C3PAO audit for level 2. And I will say this, hopefully as encouragement to the folks that are still planning on doing that. It was a lot less intimidating than I thought it would be, largely because by the time we got to that point, I think everybody really understood their job. They took pride in what they were doing. They understood why they were doing it. And I think the folks that participated in the audit actually were, enjoyed actually talking about what they do and why they do it and how they do it. So again, at the end of the day, our journey wasn't about locking down everything. It was about understanding what really needed to be controlled and doing that in a way that still allowed our business to operate effectively. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Doug. So we've had a couple come in that are both statements as well as questions. So I'm just going to kind of rephrase a little bit about this. So one of the comments, if you will, was about how you limited your scope. You talked about the enclave itself, but one of the commenters also mentioned about also limiting the number of users and the number of employees that actually work with CUI. Did you take on kind of that as part of that overall, de-scoping, if you will?
We did, in fact, and the question that we asked ourselves was, okay, who needs access to CUI? So we have, if you were to look at our organization, people kind of fall into one of two categories. Either they're consultants in the field working directly to support contracts, or they're our back office staff. Our back office staff would include, the functions that you would expect: human resources, finance, business development, proposal development, IT, facility security. Those were the folks really that we realized were the ones that were going to potentially require access to CUI. And it actually was, it's not all the same CUI. So our facility security officer has some CUI that she needs access to. Our business development team has CUI that they need access to, but it's different CUI than what the FSO needs. So yeah, we absolutely looked at that and tried to, as much as we could reduce who actually had access to it. So IT doesn't really require access to CUI. They just require the ability to administer the enclave without being able to actually see the CUI within the enclave. So, I mean, we absolutely looked at those things, and you absolutely want to make sure that you reduce the cadre of people that that have access to the CUI.
Okay. We also got another question about, did you guys do a mock assessment, or how did you handle kind of figuring out when you're ready to do or engage with that C through PAO?
That's a great question. So, one of the things that we did is, we when we first went for certification under ISO 27001, we built, our own tracking tools to track all the requirements and our implementation of the controls, and that quickly became evident to us that for CMMC that was going to be probably too much, too heavy of a load. We ended up actually finding a tool, and I'm happy to tell folks about that tool if they want to know. But the tool actually allowed us to track all the individual requirements. The tool allowed us to track our compliance against those requirements. The tool actually helped us generate our system security plan. The tool allowed us to track where we were with respect to our SPUR score. So yeah, I mean, I think the use of tools in this is, it would be a great, great thing for anyone to consider. I will say, from a cost perspective, not overly cost prohibitive, even for small businesses. We are a small business, but we could afford a tool that allowed us to do things like, assess our policies. Give us a reasonable sense of confidence around where we were in terms of compliance with just our policy statements, and then track our compliance with actual control implementation. So tools are out there. I know that Exostar has some of them. I can personally say that I've looked at and like those tools very much. But I'll leave it at that.
Great. So, Doug, can you give us just a little context about Synertex itself, kind of, what business you're actually in, size, et cetera, just to give the audience kind of a where you're coming from perspective?
Absolutely. So Synertex is a federal government defense and IC contractor. We are about 200 folks at this point. We've been in business for about 10 years, and most of our folks, we have a fairly small overhead team, back office team. The vast majority of our folks are on contract, on site, and as a result, our IT footprint is quite small. We don't do development on company hosted equipment, anything of that nature. So for us, that was very helpful in us minimizing the scope, right, of our environment. And yeah, so we do work for DoD, now DOW, the Intel community, things of that nature, everything from training to some development work, a lot of analysis work, things of that nature.
Great. Well, I think we're coming up on time, Doug. I want to thank you so much for your time today. Great presentation, a lot of great information there for the entire audience. So once again, thanks for participating today, everyone. We will turn it over to the next group.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Douglas and Kevin. Fantastic information, and thank you to the questions coming in, seeing some really good questions from the audience. We recognize that spending 4 hours with us today is a time commitment. So throughout today's sessions, we built in a few breaks so that you can step away and come back, or answer emails and come back. So we have a short break right now until 12:15 Eastern time. So keep this window open, go grab lunch if you're on the East Coast, or a drink, and then come back and we will see you at 12:15. Keep the window open and we will see you back shortly. Hello, everyone. We've got just about a few more minutes, about a little bit less than 10 minutes until our next session starts. So in the meantime, please sit comfortable. I've got a few CMMC themed dad jokes for you, so get comfortable. The first is, why did the contractor bring a ladder to the CMMC audit? Because they heard they needed to reach level 2. Our cybersecurity strategy used to be HOPE. Apparently, that's not a recognized control family. Why did the chicken become a security guard? Because it heard there was some foul play going on. That was not CMMC related. I see a few more questions coming in. So keep them coming. If we get a few more, then maybe we can start taking some of those as we wait for our next session to join. But I've got just a couple more for you. We are very committed to zero trust, especially when interns send calendar invites. Why? Wait, I'm reading through some help here, so let's find a good one. Our incident response plan is excellent. Step 1, panic. Step 2, open the incident response plan. All right. If you have any CMMC jokes, feel free to stick them into our chat. We can see if they're better than the ones that I have. We appreciate all of those. So again, we've just got about 5-6 more minutes and then we'll get started again. All right, everybody, we're going to be starting in about 2-3 minutes. So if you want to start circling back and coming back to your computer, if you can hear me, a few more dad jokes for you. Compliance doesn't build character, it builds spreadsheets. I think we all feel that. We practice tabletop exercises so much now nobody trusts conference rooms anymore. CMMC, where just wing it becomes a finding. I think there are some better ones out there, so keep sending those. So we're going to start inviting our next speakers to get ready, and we'll be joining them very shortly. All right, I'm going to start welcoming us back to give us a few minutes to get ready for our next speakers. Thank you, everybody who is with us. And it looks like nearly everybody has stayed. When you take breaks, you always worry, but we're very glad you're all still with us today. We are ready to move into our next session. Again, really healthy Q&A happening. Please keep that up. If you do not want to ask a question to the full attendee, there is a private chat option that you can send your questions directly, and we are answering questions from both the private chat as well as the attendee chat at the end of the sessions. As well as I forgot to call out Joey, who has been on the chat answering questions throughout the day, so appreciate his efforts. So our next session is From Controls to Evidence, Making Compliance Demonstrable. Our moderator for this session is Josh Leary, Director of Professional Services with Exostar. Joining him today is Lawrence Baden from Sikich, a lead certified CMMC assessor with deep experience in assessment execution. Also joining us is Sean Olson from Zen Secured, a cybersecurity leader and lead CMMC certified assessor. Welcome, team. I'll hand it over to you now for whoever's kicking it off.
Hi, I'm Kim. I'm not quite sure why my camera isn't turning on. I've tried several times, so I apologize for that.
We had that happen, unfortunately, on our last session, so we will be very happy to hear your voice today.
Thanks. So just to introduce, I'm Josh Leary. I'm the Director of Professional Services here at Exostar, covering our broad portfolio of products, including our CMMC products. Sean, do you want to give a quick intro and then we can move to Lawrence?
Sure. My name is Sean Olson. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer. Hopefully you can hear me. I just want to validate that real quick.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lawrence. Yeah, my name is Sean Olson. I'm Chief Compliance Officer at Zen Secured, and I am a lead CCA, as Kim indicated. And over to Lawrence.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Name is Lawrence Baden, also a lead CCA from Sikich. Currently a senior security consultant with some Navy experience as well. So good to be here.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Lawrence. So we can dive straight into the topics. One of the first topics I want to introduce to you all is really on organizations that say they meet controls today. We see that a lot in the scoping calls that we have with clients, saying that they think they meet those controls today. But my question to both Sean and Lawrence is, what separates them from really being able to demonstrate compliance during an assessment? It's obviously one thing being able to just say, I meet those controls, versus another of being able to actually demonstrate that they are meeting them. So Sean, do you want to go ahead and take a stab at that first?
Sure. So I guess the first question that I would ask myself if I'm an OSC who's facing a CCA such as myself in a C3PAO engagement is, can I show the receipts for everything that I'm claiming in my policy? Hopefully we have a policy. And in my system security plan, the SSP. So I'm making claims in there ostensibly about the condition of my environment, the condition of my organization relative to the requirements of CMMC level 1, level 2, or level 3. And so I need to be able to demonstrate that I'm actually doing those things. Just like you said, it's one thing to claim it. It's another thing to actually prove it. So I don't normally like to liken CMMC to an IRS audit, right? But if you think about what would happen in the case of an IRS audit, what would you be expecting the IRS auditor to want from you when they come to your house and start asking you questions about your tax return? Show the receipts. They're going to want to see the receipts. And that foundationally is where we start. Now, hopefully everybody on this call who has some part to play in their organization's CMMC journey has been able to acquire, download the relative or relevant information from the DOW site. That's the scoping guide for their respective level, CMMC level, and that's also the assessment guide. Both of these guides really help us understand what is required to demonstrate those receipts.
Okay. Yeah. I think so. Just like Sean said, I think the difference pretty much comes down to one word, right? Proof. Okay. Saying you meet a control is just a claim that you are making. But demonstrating it is a story that you tell with your artifact. So what I normally see in assessment is that organizations confuse implementation with compliance, right? They got, firewall configured, they've deployed an MFA, they got policies that are written out, and they think that, that's the, finish line. But assessors like myself, Sean, are not grading intentions, right? We are grading what can be verified. So demonstrable compliance has, in my eyes, there are three characteristics to it. Is it documented in the SSP with enough specificity, right? That even a layman, an outsider can understand, how the control works in your environment. The second thing is evidence with current artifacts that map to the assessment objective. Don't just write things out at the control level, right? Can it be mapped to the assessment objective? Can that evidence be mapped to the assessment objective? And then I think the last one that pretty much ties the documentation and the evidence together is the operational piece. And here we're talking about can we get a system admin? Can we get a network administrator? Can we get that HR personnel to walk us through the process live without scrambling? Because if you wrote that document, if you are the system owner, then pretty much you should be able to, just, tell us how it works, right? So the documentation, the evidence, and the operational piece put together, I think it gives a really complete, view of how that control is being met within the environment. So that would be my advice.
Great, thanks. And that is obviously key overall. If you're not able to demonstrate your evidence and prove to your assessors that you are meeting those controls through your evidence, then ultimately you're not going to get a successful outcome at the end of your assessment. So great. On the next topic I've got is really related to SMBs, small, medium businesses. So again, this is quite common. We see due to maybe some of the costs that are involved, etc., with CMMC compliance, that SMBs often think that they are able to really just get assessment ready by themselves. And obviously evidence comes into that picture as a key point. So in your experience, both Sean and Lawrence, where do you see that a kind of do-it-yourself approach tends to break down whenever it comes to producing credible assessor-ready evidence from an SMB perspective that has chosen to really just try and go on this journey all by themselves?
Lawrence, you want to start that one?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to DIY, usually where it does normally breaks down is, at the seam of, the technical work and the assessment perspective, right? Most internal teams are excellent at doing security, configuring tools, writing policies, running operations. Where the struggle is anticipating how an assessor will examine, that work. So they write SSPs in their own internal language instead of mapping, to assessment objectives. They collect evidence that proves that something happened, but not that it happened in scope at the right time and consistently. I think that is where, at least that is the number one thing that I see when it comes to DIY. Josh, you did mention cost factor, right? But I think for me, that the number one thing that I see is writing something as to how you perceive it, right? But from an assessor's point of view, it might be completely different. And something that happened, proving that something happened, but not that it happened in scope, right, at the right time and consistently. I think there's a huge disconnect there when it comes to DIYs.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. And you said something that I would highlight again, just to make sure it's really clear. It comes down to understanding the real requirements of those 110 requirements. We call them requirements now. That's what the DOW wants us to call them. They used to be called practices, or in 800-171, they're called controls, right? But
Yeah.
ultimately, what we're talking about are the 110 requirements. But there are requirements underneath those, sub-requirements, if you will, the assessment objectives that Lawrence was talking about. Those are the real requirements that need to be looked at individually to see and know if you're answering the questions for your evidence correctly, right? You really do need to understand those assessment objectives. Now, you can always call me and Lawrence for help on these things, of course.
Yeah.
But in a DIY situation, Josh, that's usually where I see the disconnect, is that people are not understanding those real assessment objective requirements underneath the 110 language, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
ahead,
think, Josh, probably the other thing that I will add to it is just objectivity. It's always hard to grade your own homework, right? I got 3 boys, and every night that is homework, and it's funny how you will go through it and always find something wrong, right? Something that they didn't catch from the beginning. So a fresh set of practitioner eyes. It could be a consultant, just like Sean said, an RPO, or even doing a basic gap analysis or gap assessment or a mock assessment, almost always finds gaps that the internal team has been looking past for months, right? So that could also be something that could be done. Just have an RP, someone take a look at what you're doing. Just give you a better understanding of the controls and the objectives as well.
Makes sense. I guess you can also liken it to a developer that tests his own code as well, right?
Exactly.
Very much so. Yep.
Great. So again, sticking really tightly on the evidence topic, I think it would be great for you to talk through what do you see as examples of weak versus strong evidence for the same control. You know, can you give our audience some examples of differing, you know, levels of evidence against the same control or requirements?
Sure, I'll start this one. Actually, we're going to talk. One of the items toward the end of this discussion is we're going to look at an actual piece of evidence, or one that we made up, a fake piece of evidence. But we're going to kind of do a little exercise assessment of that piece of evidence. But basically, when I'm looking for strong evidence, what I want to see is, and Lawrence alluded to this earlier, is mapping. Okay, and we call that traceability in the compliance world. How does this piece of evidence point to the claim that's being made? Are there references in there? Is there an index that says, okay, this is related to this document or this requirement? Are we able to point to the different things that we need to see in order to demonstrate that this piece of evidence belongs to a claim or belongs to a policy? That's super important. So if you don't have those sort of elements in your piece of evidence that you're looking at, then it's probably going to be fairly weak. But we also ask two questions, and I'm sure Lawrence is going to smile, because in CCA class, we get this burned into our brain, which is the idea of adequacy and sufficiency. So adequacy is the first step. This is asking the question, is it the right kind of evidence for the thing I'm trying to support, right? Is it the right kind of evidence? Is this user list meet the criteria for user control that this requirement is saying? And then if I can answer yes to that question, yeah, that's adequate, that answers the question. Then I'm asking the question, is it sufficient? Is there enough of the right kind of evidence to support that claim? If I can answer both of those things with those two things with a yes, then I probably have a good piece of evidence, a strong piece of evidence. If I can't, especially to the first one, then I probably have a weak piece of evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think just to summarize what Sean, just said, a strong evidence pretty much answers the question before the assessor has to ask. That's it. That's pretty much it. Instead of giving an assessor the opportunity to dig deeper, provide something that just answers the assessor's question even before asking. That's pretty much it. Providing an asset inventory list that would drive an assessor to ask questions about, okay, who is this user? What assets, the user assets, what permission they have within the environment, what can they do as a read, write, modify, that kind of stuff doesn't really help. But if you provide an evidence that actually shows all these, right, it pretty much answers the question even before there's a lot of digging around. And the digging around normally comes with the sufficiency, right? Is there enough of the right evidence? And I think that is where most OSCs or clients get disconnected. They don't really understand why I provided an incident response, a tabletop exercise that we did, right, a year ago. And an assessor is asking questions about it, right? But it's not just the adequacy, the sufficiency also matters, right? So providing a whole piece of evidence, if I should put it that way, it helps answers most questions even before the assessor digs into it.
I think that moves us probably quite nicely on to the next question I had for you guys. You probably alluded to it a little bit before around, you have your evidence there, but actually being able to explain it confidently. I think you gave an example of, maybe asking to meet with HR or someone else to take you through the evidence.
Yeah.
Well, my question is, what, in your experience, has been the kind of fastest way for organizations to lose credibility during the assessment?
You want to take that one first? There's a few different ways. Fastest, I don't know, but go ahead, Lawrence.
I think, first of all, we can talk about claiming something is met, right, when something is actually partially just implemented, right? And I'm going to go back to what, Sean mentioned, the adequacy and the sufficiency, right? Assessors on our part, we are trained to look for, the little gaps, right? Inflating a self-assessment don't survive, any sort of sampling. And I'm going to give you an example that I experienced. So a statement of work comes in from a client, right? And within the statement of work, they indicated that they don't have an incident response plan. They've never done a tabletop exercise, nothing, okay? But they presented a self-assessment that they did, and guess what? They have a perfect score. Okay, tabletop exercise, incident response. If I'm not mistaken, my math might probably be off, but those are like 5 points each, if I'm not mistaken, right? So I went ahead and asked the question, who did the self-assessment, right? Guess what? It was the sales guy at the front desk who has no clue what CMMC is about. Just went in there and clicked yes, 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 110 times, and that was a perfect score. But this individual has no clue what the controls are asking, right? So claiming met when something is partially implemented, the moment we find that one inconsistency, we basically start questioning everything from there. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, question marks in documents or titles of documents not really matching things, or anytime we have what appears to be a disconnect between pieces of evidence and any claim that's being made, for sure. And then I have a couple of others to add, which maybe would be more like cautionary tales for everybody on the call. So one of the things that we see often going into an assessment or attempting to do an assessment for an OSC organization seeking certification is when we ask the question, which is phase one of the whole process of assessing, tell us about your scoping. How did you scope your environment? And if I'm not getting a good response on that right out of the gate, then I'm really reluctant to trust the rest of what's going to happen. And probably we're going to end up kicking them back out to say, okay, you're not ready yet. Because scoping is the first and most important part of an assessment. So when Lawrence and I come in, as assessors, we're going to be looking at that first thing, right? This is after the C3PAO has done all of the arrangements and everything else. Once we get to the scoping, the phase one, then if that's not going well, we're probably not going to be able to continue. And so that's one thing that I see. Also, when one person in the organization, let's say we have an organization of 30 people or 30 plus people, and the OSC has decided that they kind of want one person to sort of handle all of the interviews and all of the documentation production and all of the work, right? All of the interaction. That's a red flag for me as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong, because if it's a 5-person organization, then it kind of makes more sense, right? Okay, one person's really responsible for all of this and maybe does all the IT. We all wear many hats in small organizations, so that makes sense. But if I'm looking at a medium business in particular, and one person's sort of handling things and railroading things, that's a red flag to me, that maybe the full org is not really in on the whole CMMC game, right? And that would throw me off.
Yeah.
So 2 examples there, and cautionary tales. Don't be that guy.
Great. Thanks for taking us. Thanks for taking us through those. So the next question I have is quite prevalent in the environment that we're in today with AI, etc. And we hear it a lot around evidence collection. But in your opinion, how much of evidence collection can really be automated today versus needs real manual work to go through?
I can take that one first if you want, Lawrence.
Okay. Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
I guess by default, the answer would be quite a bit, actually. It's possible,
Yeah.
especially if you're using like a managed solution like an Exostar Enclave, for example, not to throw that out as an advertisement. But if you have something on the back end to support you on that with a lot of automated processes, then you'll get a lot of that, as a value add. But you also see people who are pretty talented in the scripting department, let's say, who can come up with evidence in an automated fashion pretty quickly. But then again, I would continue my cautionary tale here that, and this is probably not going to be the case for too long, considering the potency of AI these days. We're not quite there yet, but it seems like we might be at some point. Human beings still need to look at the outputs, right? You really still need to be able to do all the things we've been talking about earlier, trace it back, make sure it's answering the questions, make sure there's sufficiency and adequacy in that evidence. So yes, you can automate these things, and there are all kinds of cool IT tools out there, that GRC platforms and all these different things, but sometimes those tools require a lot more of your elbow grease than originally advertised. So they may not be as helpful to automate as you might think. You still need to do that follow-up on the back end to make sure that evidence is correct. That's my thought.
Yeah. So I think, to add to what Sean said, automation pretty much works well at the technical, log-based level. So the identity and access, export, vulnerability scanning, reports, audit logs, configuration, baselines, patch compliance. If your tools can produce, time-stamped, structured outputs, automation captures most of the heavy lifting, then definitely automation, is the ideal way to go. But where automation breaks down is the human and process side, right? Tabletop exercises. I mean, you cannot automate that.
No.
With a GRC tool. Incident response, artifacts, training records, policy acknowledgements, those still require a person to drive them, validate, and tag them appropriately. So from my practitioner take, automation is going to get you the artifacts, but does not get you the evidence package, right? Someone has to map each artifact to a practice and assessment objective, label it, place it in your evidence repository with context. And I think that is the part that organizations are underestimating. GRC tool, definitely, yeah. There's a whole new field out there called GRC engineering. Yeah. If manual screenshots, collecting evidence, if it can be automated, yeah, definitely. But I think there should be that human and process side as well, understanding that not everything can be automated.
Great. And just before we dive into the mock piece of evidence that we spoke about before, I did want to ask one more question of you two around maintaining evidence, really related to more long term. Let's just say someone has completed their assessment successfully, but it's an ongoing journey, right? So
Yeah.
In your opinion, how is it best for people to maintain evidence over time so that in their next assessment they're not scrambling beforehand? What's the best way for people to maintain that evidence?
Well, I think that this is basically a continuous compliance process, right? If you just completed the assessment, I am hoping that you came in with an evidence repository, which has to be hashed, right? So that evidence repository is basically where you are starting your continuous compliance from, right? So that evidence is still in play. Not forgetting the fact that there is that, annual affirmation as well, which is probably another topic for another day, right? But that evidence repository is where we are continuing this whole process from. If there are any updates to the environment, not so much that affects the scope of your environment, but documentation update. So, Sean was the CEO on our last, assessment. Sean departed the organization. I don't think we would want to come back 3 years for a reassessment and find Sean's name is still on that access policy, right? Access control policy. So I think having a central repository where we keep in evidence and assigning some sort of a system owner, someone that is going to make sure that they are continuously updating any evidence change, right, would help. Because I don't think much is really going to change from, the initial assessment to, the triennial assessment, right? Not much. If anything is going to change, then, the environment, the scope changes. But I'm thinking probably 90% of that evidence is still going to be in play, but needs that regular update. And we need to make sure that someone is actually doing that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And a couple of things I would add to that. I mean, first and foremost, having a good repository where you can stash that stuff that's secured from the rest of the organization, those people who don't have a need to know, right?
Yeah.
Is great. And yes, so Lawrence was also talking about monitoring. There's a continuous monitoring, one of the requirements in CMMC Level 2, and I don't have them all memorized by their control number, but there's one about monitoring, which in the RMF and FedRAMP world we call continuous monitoring, and it's about keeping on top of the controls and their effectiveness, the requirements and their effectiveness. And so this is a periodic thing that must be done. One great tip, and Lawrence, you alluded to this as well, is having that person, that champion who's sort of governing the process for the organization. And again, we all wear many hats, I get it. But if you find someone in your organization who's a really good project or program manager, regardless of their knowledge of CMMC, that's always something they can come up to speed on if need be, but at least someone to task manager, bird dog, those things that have to happen on a regular basis. Another example of that is, having a change control board, or having, monitoring your changes that you're doing and making sure that all the documentation related to those changes get updated. If you have a policy that's getting updated, Lawrence was talking about that, am I still the CEO of this organization? Or, what has changed since the last time we wrote this document or this piece of evidence? So yeah, you really need strong champions in your organization. If you've got a go-getter, someone who just does work, that's always a good candidate if you can spare them to help you mind all of the continuous monitoring tasks that CMMC requires.
Great. I think that's a lot of good advice for folks that are maybe going through their assessment or planning their assessment, so that they know we shouldn't just do the assessment, hopefully they get past it, and then push things to the side and worry about it down the line.
That's right. It's not a one and done, right? So you've got to keep on top of it.
Yeah.
Right. So next, we have a piece of market evidence that we want to talk through, and talk through really around why we think this would or would not pass in terms of an assessment. Sean, do you want to take us away with that?
Sure. Do you want me to share it or show it, or how do I? Do you have that available to bring up on the screen?
Kim, can we share the screen? Is that possible?
Yeah, you can. Is this on your screen?
I think
All right,
Sean,
I'm going to Yep, I'll share it on my screen. I just wanted to make sure that was possible to do. Sorry. All right, hang on one second. I'll bring that up. Okay, I think this is the one. Okay, do you see something that says Acme inventory sample? Let's see if it does show up. Doesn't look like it's showing up.
I see it on my end.
Okay, but it doesn't look like it's being shown on the storyboard here. Can we validate that real quick?
Yeah, I can see it as well.
You can see it? Okay, cool. I'm getting a we're sorry page on that. All right, so hopefully everybody can see this. We see 2 tabs down here at the bottom. So just to make sure we're looking at the same thing, we see asset list 01 and asset list 02, correct?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this first one, this I mocked up the other day, and I got it to Lawrence and Josh a little bit late, so they haven't had as much time to look at this. But basically, I have 2 examples here, and we're going to go ahead and grade these 2 as if we were assessors. So I'd really like Lawrence to kick it off with this very first one here. Is this a good piece of evidence for an asset list, and why is it, or why would it not be?
Well, I think, Sean, just the fact that we got question marks in there.
Yeah, and by the way, this is very much like an asset list I actually received during an assessment. Now the names have been changed to protect the innocent here, of course, but
Yeah.
this is very much like what I have received before officially. So go ahead.
Yep. I see question marks in there under system name. In terms of ownership, there are, I see Dave, I see Sam, and others as to if there are CY assets. And when we talk about CY assets, mind you, it could be people, processes, technology, right? Others doesn't really it doesn't cut it, right? In terms of type, there are laptops as to what type of laptop, what version of software OS on it. We don't know when it was purchased. We don't know who it belongs to, the location of that particular asset. So there's a lot of question mark, like the question marks in there that, can be pointed out in terms of this not being what, could be accepted as an asset inventory.
Yeah, 100%. And, we have question marks, but we also don't have last names for some of these people. Like you said, we don't have locations. So if I receive this piece of evidence as an assessor, I'm going to lose that credibility we were talking about earlier, Josh, pretty quickly if this is one of the examples of the evidence they're providing, because it definitely isn't going to meet the assessment objectives that I could easily go and look up and see what's required for these asset lists, right? And so I would consider this a pretty weak example of good evidence. So what about this one, Lawrence? This is the second example here.
Yep. So definitely this is what a good example of an asset inventory should be. So we got a system name. We have the asset, type, and this is very important, right? I think under CMMC, there are different types of assets, and CY definitely, the biggest one here, SPAs, another one, CRMAs, specialized assets, and anything out of scope. You can decide not to put it in here, but I would advise put it in there as well. But we have very good examples here. Now, a CY asset, what is the purpose of that particular asset, right? What is it doing? When was that asset purchased? What is it? Hardware, software. And then the user, and see, this is where the assessment, the evidence, right, maps, right, to a particular objective. So this particular asset belongs to this user. Is it a mission critical asset? Definitely not. Where is this asset located? Now, the organization might have different locations, so we need to know where this asset is located. And I think there's just a whole lot more. This makes the assessment process a whole lot easier, right? It makes the process, I would think, just like Sean, there wouldn't be much questions asked about this particular inventory list, than the first list that was provided.
For
And
sure. I mean,
going back to what
maybe
you
it's
said,
not perfect, right? Go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
yeah, I was just saying, going back to what you said earlier, I mean, this is the type of thing that starts to build credibility early in your assessment if you can demonstrate evidence like this, right, Sean?
Yeah, if I see something that looks like this on an asset list, there are ways to do this in an automated fashion if you have the IT tools and whatnot. But if I see something that's more of a manual one done like this, I'm going to have a lot more confidence that the persons who are, obtaining this evidence and doing the work here understood the assignment, right? Understood exactly what's required and could fulfill that. Maybe it's not perfect. There are things we could obviously do to this particular one to make it better. But some of the standouts that Lawrence mentioned, here we have our asset type, which is required of us for our scoping exercise, that scoping guide that the DOW produces for us. We want to tag these assets as to their type to understand where they fit in the general scope of our CMMC journey. And so if this column is missing, there's really not much we can do to continue on with the assessment. So it's very important. We also have system names here, and they don't have to be creative. But we have, identification tags, including, some deeper level stuff like their hardware serial numbers and things like that. We have a way to tag these assets as really existing in the world. We have purchase dates. We have all this information that we've collected, who the user is that it belongs to, or if we have one here that shows it's going to be reset because the person either left or something like that. This tells us a lot of good information about the OSC's readiness to deal with the assessment. It's a good piece of evidence. Not perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for taking us through that, Sean and
Sure.
Lawrence. Appreciate it. I think that's the end of the content that we had prepared. I don't know if we have any questions from the audience.
Well, we've got 2 CCAs, so now's a good time, right? If you wanted to know what a CCA thinks about something.
No better time.
No better time.
There are a couple questions here,
Great.
and I'm scrolling really quickly and probably more coming through. And attendees, remember, you are welcome to put in questions right now. How about this last one? Sean, how could the asset list be improved?
Well, if I have an automated tool for one thing, because, there are 3 assessment methods that Lawrence and I would use as CCAs when we're looking at evidence. The 3 assessment methods are first, looking at documentation, right? And so we would want to see that documentation lines up, but we also want to do an interview, right, to make sure that we're hearing what's going on with this piece of evidence. And then the third, and probably the most important for something like this, is what we call testing. So if we have an asset list like this where we can test it against what's real, maybe we can look in their Active Directory to see that these devices exist. Maybe we could do all these things. There could be some more output in this list that would help us find that traceability. Maybe we could even label this document better, right? We'd have our references to our CMMC controls, for example, our CMMC requirements, so that we have that traceability.
Yeah.
That would be nice little add-on for this, but it's pretty good as it is.
Excellent. Okay. How often should organizations be reviewing and refreshing evidence?
Lawrence.
Well, I think that would depend on your policies and documentation. When it comes to reviewing, updating, not to sway into Rev 3, but I think that's where the organization defined parameters come in, right? Currently in revision 2, it's whatever you state. But if your document tells me that you are reviewing and updating assets, right, every quarter, then I expect that someone did a quarterly review, every 3 months. And I want to see some sort of proof that you are actually doing it. But there should be some sort of stipulated review process timeline in place. Most organizations will go with, the quarterly, semi-annual, or even monthly review process. And if possible, not to set any boundaries, but whenever there are system changes, right? Whenever there are system changes, it could fall, within or outside those parameters. But do I want to wait till the end of the month or till the end of the quarter to make the update? When a system change happens, I want to make sure that reflects within my inventory.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, next question. In what areas have companies failed assessments the most? Email, off chain. Oh, sorry. Let me read that again. In what areas have companies failed assessments the most? Email, off chain.
Email, what was the last part of that?
Off chain, so authorization change, I would think.
Oh, email or authorization change? Is that what we're saying?
Chain.
I'm not.
C-H-I-N.
Oh, chain. Yes, chain. Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question, but
Yeah.
I would
I
say
think-
that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that we do have a session a little bit later about assessments, and that it kind of started out as a what goes wrong. And has changed the direction a little bit, but they're talking about specifically what can go wrong. So I think that question may be answered a little bit later today as well.
Okay.
Okay, how long does it take to become a CCA?
Well, there are self-paced courses for this. I think I did like a night school version of that where I was meeting with my instructor 2 times a week for like an hour and a half each. And it took about maybe it was 8 weeks. I can't remember exactly. Not too long, but you need to go through the CCP process first. So
Yeah.
every CCA has to start with being a CCP. And in order to become a CCP, you've got to go through training and instruction, cost a couple of grand. And then the CCA costs another couple of grand on top of that. So all told, I mean, if you're really diligent, you can do boot camp style trainings over a week or a weekend. But I think most people, who have jobs probably would do a night school type of situation. And that's about 6 to 8 weeks per accreditation. So CCP about 6 to 8, CCA about 6 to 8, something like that. I can't remember exactly. Lawrence?
Yeah, I think for me, I went through Edwards, their training class, which took a whole week. So Monday through Friday, it was basically an all-day thing. That was pretty much what it was. But I think to Sean's point, there are a lot of training formats or differences out there, especially if you have a very busy schedule, and there are formats that you can just meet in the night for an hour or two. I think that there are training partners out there that can accommodate that as well. But mine was, the entire week.
Yeah, and I just want to add too, real quickly, there's the amount of time it takes to do the training and pass the tests and all that good stuff. But another thing that happens, and Lawrence can attest to this, that the government, the DoD wants to do a background screening on you, and it's pretty rigorous. It's a T3, right? It's a very rigorous screening process, and it takes months. So we always say, just because you pass the CCA test doesn't mean you're there yet. You've got quite a bit of time to go through that adjudication process for your background screening. So a lot of people complain about that one, and I joined the chorus on that one.
Yeah. Yep, that is true. I currently have a colleague that took CCP, almost a year ago, and currently
Okay.
has a CCA, and he's still waiting on his Tier 3 background check. So yeah, that is one thing else to consider as well.
Lots of great questions coming in both on the private chat and in the attendee chat. I probably won't be able to make it through all of these, so I've got a couple more for you. How should organizations think about sustaining evidence post-certification?
Having a good repository that you have secured. The evidence itself would not be considered CUI, but it is very sensitive, right? So you got to make sure that that you have that protected, that you have a long-standing place. Now, Lawrence had talked about earlier where we do hashing on the actual evidence pool, the body of evidence that you submitted as part of your certification. And so that ends up being the end result. And so that gets hashed, that gets stored and not touched. Now, the organization doesn't necessarily have to keep that, at the end of the day, they should. Obviously, they want to, because it does get passed off to Uncle Sam, right, through the EMAS system. So that will always be retained with those hash values so that anybody who goes back to look at that package will know that it's legit stuff. But for you internally in your as an OSC, you want to make sure that you're doing the equivalent inside your organization. You have a nice place to stash that, only relevant or people who should access it are getting access to it, and that you have some controls in place to make sure that those things don't get changed arbitrarily without, unless it's legitimate change.
Excellent. Next one. What does the CCA consider as a significant change to a system?
Oh, that's going to vary across the board.
Yeah. I think that is going to, so let's say a significant change to a system. First of all, even before I address that would basically bring that your scoping into question, right? If there is a significant change to a system, let's say a firewall that was added to the organization, or a major change in a firewall that was initially not part of the scope, or locations that have been added, right? Those are very big changes, probably moving from one location to the other, a firewall that has been changed. Those are organizational changes that affect your scoping. Now, there are other things that wouldn't readily or significantly affect your scope. It could be just a change in personnel, someone who was a system owner or an approver within the organization. Those are all just document changes, minor changes that could be done. It doesn't really affect scoping that much, but major system changes, firewalls, stuff like that, those would affect the scope significantly.
All right, we are about time, so Josh, I'll hand it back over to you to wrap this session.
Sorry, Kim, I think we missed.
Yeah, it was a little quiet.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, much better. I was just saying we are at time for the end of this session, so I'll hand it back over to you all, Josh, to wrap the session.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kim. I guess if there's any questions that we didn't answer, we can probably, take those and write up answers, and maybe the team can distribute them after, because I do see a couple more questions coming in. But just want to say thanks both to Lawrence and Sean for their time today, and giving their perspective on our topic. So thank you both. We appreciate your participation.
My pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Lawrence, don't go too far, because we are about to get directly into our next session, which is readiness and remediation from partial implementation to assessment ready with Lawrence. So thank you for continuing on, and we'll turn it over to you.
Good luck, Lawrence.
All right. Thank you. All right. Okay. All right. So continuing, this pretty much has some significance to what we just talked about. And this is moving from, partial implementation to actually getting ourselves ready, assessment ready. So in this session, we are going to be looking at scoping our environment, which I do believe Sean talked a little bit about. And then we take a look at documentation gaps, evidence readiness, making sure that evidence package is tight enough to go through an assessment. Some remediation strategies when it comes to both, gap assessment, readiness assessment, and then the assessment day realities. But I think for now, it's a little bit sad to say, but only 1% of DEP contractors are fully prepared for CMMC right now. So this is based on a DEP report from 2025. That probably has changed, but back in 2025, this was the report that we had. But where the DEP or the OSC environment, OSA environment currently stands, and this is from two independent 2025 studies that were provided from Cybersheath and Merrill Research. And then I think Radical DEP Security Maturity Report. And these are all from 2025. So 1%, just 1% are fully prepared for CMMC assessment. And this is something that I see daily when I talk to clients, right? And this is down from 8% in 2023 and 4% in 2024. And this is very understandable because prior to the final rule, I think most of us felt that we were ready to go and we were hit with a whole bunch of surprises within the rule as to what is what, right? 85% still fall short of basic regulatory standards. Like I did mention, you have a client presenting an SOW, a self-assessment that they did saying they have 100% perfect score, and there are question marks and no incident response, anything like that being done. 17% of contractors report negative scores. I think honestly, this probably could be more than that. Okay, and based on our last, I think Cyber AB Town Hall, we currently have about 1198 CMMC certificates that have been awarded, right? As against more than 200,000 companies that actually need certification. So these numbers are a little bit alarming. C3PAOs are booking 6 to 9 months out, gone were the days when we thought, CMMC was just, just something being thrown out there, a buzzword. This is not a buzzword anymore. It's something that is real and is ongoing currently. Okay, so I'm going to try as much as possible to move through this quickly so we can have time for some questions. So scoping, defining your scope before anything else, right? This is so critical. And as we saw from that asset inventory that we presented, a wrong scope, wrong remediation, failed assessment. Basically, once you get the scoping of your environment wrong, everything else is just going the wrong direction from there. And the most important thing that we need to figure out at this phase is your CUI boundary, right? Where does CUI flow, right? We're looking at those systems that store, process, or transmit CUI. And you need to map your data flows before mapping your controls. There's absolutely no reason why you should be looking at, 3.1.1, A, B, C, 3.6.3, when you have no idea, how CUI is coming into your organization, right? Is it coming through DoD, a portal, emails, Prime portals? How does it enter your organization? What systems does the CUI touch? What systems process that CUI? Where are we storing that CUI? What personal individuals have access to that CUI within your environment? And last but not the least, how that CUI is leaving that environment. So the CUI boundary is very important for OSCs that are going for C3P assessments. Your assessor, lead assessor, CCA, is going to validate. Now, mind you, their job is not to help you define your boundary. They are there to validate that CUI boundary, that scope. And then we take a look at the security protection assets. So these are systems that perform security functions within your organization. Firewalls, identity and access management, log monitoring tools. These are all assets that inherit requirements, even if they don't touch CUI. So these need to be labeled out as well. The one thing that most organizations forget is the ESP conundrum, right? This has always been some sort of confusion. I don't even want to get into the whole cloud service provider that is an MSP or MSSP. It can get a little bit confusing. But when we are scoping environment, we need to keep in mind ESPs, right? ESPs that have access to our CUI environment, they fall in scope, right? So the cloud platforms, MSPs, SaaS tools that we are leveraging, we need to make sure that we keep all those in mind. Document which controls they satisfy. Now, this is where the CRM or the shared responsibility matrix comes in. If you have a client, an MSP or MSSP that has access to your CUI environment, then definitely the first thing that you would want them to provide is a shared responsibility matrix or a customer responsibility matrix. Let them tell you what exactly they are responsible for or what is shared within the environment. An SRM is okay. I've seen SRMs that just tells, what assessment objective the MSP or MSSP is responsible for. We can leave it at that. There are some SRMs that go into detail to actually say, indicate what actually the MSP or MSSP is doing to meet that particular assessment objective, right? But if an MSP or MSSP doesn't have an SRM, that is a big red flag right there. And as we all know, not all MSPs or MSSPs are the same. Luckily, we have resources out there. If you are looking for an MSP, MSSP, there are resources out there. There are some MSPs or MSSPs that have taken the opportunity to actually go through an assessment. They don't have to, but some have taken that initiative to actually go through an assessment so they can provide you with a very good SRM. And last but not the least, contracted employees and third parties. Anyone, consultants, third parties, anyone with access to CUI or in-scope systems, they all need to be identified as well. We don't want a consultant that has access to IC, even if they are a 1099 and they are touching CUI. We need to make sure that these individuals are included within the scope. And like I said previously, scoping is all about people, processes, and technology. And this could involve contracted employees and third parties as well. So assessors are going to test your scope definition, right? Unexplained assets or missing data flows are instant red flags. And basically, pre-assessment phase one, this is where we get a lot of false starts, right? An OSC, OSA think they are ready, and we go through the scoping exercise just to find out they're actually not. Okay, and then we go to the documentation stack, right? And here I want to move from the foundational documents that we all need. So the SSP, big one. Poems, if we had a self-assessment, or we just recently did a gap assessment with any identified gaps, it should be labeled within a poem, right? And then the big one that we talked about on our previous presentation, the asset inventory. So these are the foundational documents that we need. And then we move down to the architectural documentation, network diagrams, data flow diagrams, a system boundary description. Now, these could be single standalone documents or artifacts that we can provide. But I always encourage, clients, these are documents or artifacts that could be put in an SSP. When I take a look at your SSP, I should be able to see your network diagram and a data flow diagram and a description of your boundary. And then we move down to the policy layer, right? Every control should at least have, if a policy is needed, we should have a policy. And I think from our training as CCAs, lead CCAs, CCPs, we know anything that normally start off with identify or defined, there is a policy or a procedure related to it one way or the other. So make sure you have your policies in place. Policies that are current, policies that could be spoken to by system owners or control owners, right? We don't want anyone scrambling about, or policies that are not signed off, policies that were just created a day ago prior to the assessment. They should be timestamped, approved by an authority within the organization and dated as well. And then we move down to the procedure layer. So these are operational procedures by per domain. Not every one of these families requires a procedures, a run book, and work instructions. So for instance, it could be a procedure on resetting passwords, or if you get locked out, what is the procedure? Do you reach out to IT? Does a manager need to approve all that stuff, right? A run book simply for incident response, or a work instruction that could be leveraged. And then the biggest piece, right, is the evidence layer. Over here, putting everything together, right? I've seen this a lot from clients, right? If possible, evidence should be mapped to assessment objectives, okay? Map the evidence to assessment objectives. Don't just say this is 3.1.1, right? If you want to have a folder, for instance, 3.1.1, and then there are subfolders in there for 3.1.1 A, B, C, D, E, and F. It makes it a whole lot easier, right? So let's try as much as possible to map the evidence to the assessment objectives. Okay, now you've gone through an assessment. You probably did a self-assessment or a gap assessment, to get yourself ready for a C3PAO engagement, right? You've identified gaps within the organization, but not all gaps are equal, okay? So try as much as possible to prioritize by the impact on your assessment score against the implementation effort. We know definitely not having an MFA or probably missing a SIM tool within the organization. It's not just clockwork to get a SIM tool out there. You need something that will work with your organization, right? It meets the needs of the organization. So obviously there will be some research done on SIM tools out there. Obviously there will be some research done on MFA tools out there, right? So we need to make sure that we prioritize our remediation effort, right? So the quick wins: you're missing a policy. There is a gap, a disconnect between what we are saying and what is within the SSP. There is an unsigned acknowledgement, maybe an awareness training, right? That was actually done, but the individual didn't sign the acknowledgement. A password issues, right? Maybe there was a change from our policy from 12 characters to 16, but the document hasn't been updated. These are, quick things that we can readily update and move on, right? And then the high leverage remediation stuff, right? SIM login gaps, vulnerability scan programs. We are missing a vulnerability management program policy, 3.14. Maybe let's get a program in place to make sure that if we are scanning, every quarter, that reflects within our policy, privilege access controls, audit log configuration, that kind of stuff. And then the other complex ones, like Sean talked about, the network segmentation, the FIPS validated encryption, which is always a big one, right? Supply chain risk management, making sure our third parties are involved within the scope insider threat programs, right? These are complex fixes. It's going to take time. And then, the POEM candidates, right? Long lead infrastructure changes, right? There are some items that are going to take quite a while to accomplish, but within the POEM, let's have a start and an end date, and then an update schedule, right? Are we meeting every bi-weekly basis to make sure that there are updates as to exactly where we are within the POEM phase? So prioritize your remediation effort. Don't try to do everything at once. The ones that can be easily taken care of, get them out of the way. And then the big ones, make sure we are assigning it to individuals or personnel within the organization, and we are following up on it as well. Okay, so talking about POEMs. A well-managed POEM is evidence of a mature program, not a sign of weakness. So POEMs, we've seen a lot of POEMs that POEM documents that basically just like that asset inventory list. There are also some really bad POEMs out there, right? A POEM that is done right, we have every open item with a milestone date and owner, right? We want to take a look at a POEM that tells me, Joey is responsible for this particular milestone, a start and an end date, and we are doing regular updates. There is a cadence for updates as well. Items are categorized by CMMC domain and practice date. What is this POEM about, right? Is it related to 3.6.3? Has this anything to do with 3.11.1a, right? We want this labeled out. So when we take a look, someone reads that POEM, they know, okay, this is actually referring to this domain and practice ID. Progress is tracked and documented over time. Yes. Show us evidence of the status of this poem. I've seen individuals, organizations, OSCs presenting poems that are from assessments that were done last year, right? And the question, I always ask is, what are we doing about this? We got stuff going on. We had another SOC, assessment coming up. And it's been almost a year that a gap assessment was done. And there's nothing as to who exactly is managing this particular finding. There's no evidence of us meeting to talk about this. If possible, review the poem at least quarterly, right? I would say even monthly, right? If we have the dedicated personnel, a monthly check on this to know exactly what we're doing about this would help us. And completed items have closure evidence attached. Once again, we go back to the time stamped evidence. This has been signed off, completed within our GRC tool. There should be some evidence that this has been completed and closed out. Someone approved the closure of this gap. What a bad poem looks like: no dates, vague, to be determined milestones. So there's nothing in there telling us that this poem started and we are given, this assigned individual a quarter to close out this milestone. And then treating poem as a parking lot with no active remediation. Like I indicated, an assessment was done last year and gaps are just sitting around, right? Most of the time, the excuse is we just don't have the manpower or personnel. There's a lot going on, a lot of individuals wearing different hats, and we've not gotten to it. But mind you, you cannot go into a C3PAO assessment with an open poem, right? So let's not park the poem as if it's going to take care of itself, right? And then listing, just like what I said, listing items for 12 months with no progress, no executive sign off, missing linkage to risk ratings, as far as score impact. So let's make sure we are reviewing, we're tracking, we're categorizing them. There is a milestone date and owner, and then completed items are closed off. There is evidence showing that it's been closed off within the organization. Okay, so an assessment readiness checklist. And this is a 30 days out assessment readiness checklist. This could be a 60, 90 day, but for 30 days, scoping, very important. Let's make sure we got our asset inventory ready to go. Network diagram, data flow diagram. Basically, scoping is completed. And we know that there is at least someone, an individual that is going to be able to speak to what is in scope and out of scope. Documentation is a big one. SSP, right? Covers all 110 practices with implementation descriptions. The narratives within the SSP are very, very important, right? And whoever is the system owner or the control owner will be able to speak to those practices plus the assessment objectives within the SSP. And we also want to make sure, like we saw from the evidence, the documentation stack, all required policies are authored and approved. There is an owner to that document, it's signed off. We don't want to see a documentation that was completed a day before the assessment, right? All documents are authored and approved. Evidence is a big one, right? We have a central repository for the evidence. All 110 and 320 assessment objectives, they do have artifacts that are collected, right, for all practices in scope. Each artifact labeled with practice ID and assessment objective reference. So like I indicated, don't just, drop everything on access control or limiting system access into 3.1.1. Okay, I've seen this a lot in SSPs as well as in evidence repositories. Label them, right? 3.1.1 A, B, C, D, right? Practice ID, assessment objective. It makes it way much easier, right? And then poem, open items with dates, owners, current status, spreads, score calculated, submitted. We can even talk about, if it's getting ready for a C3P assessment, getting cage codes, everything in place. I've asked that question a lot. I was recently on a call with a client. I asked about, do you know what your cage code is? What is your cage code? And they had no clue what a cage code was, right? So make sure you got all that stuff. And last but not the least, staff readiness. Personnel are aware of their role descriptions. They know exactly what they are supposed to be doing. I had a fantastic mock assessment with a client. Every single individual within the organization knew what control they were speaking to. Every single one of them. And of course, it was in the SSP. So 3.6.3, we knew Joey was the one. So as soon as we got to 3.6.3, Joey started walking through it. So personnel should be aware of their role description. And this is an individual that can actually speak to the control, not just on paper. They know the control inside out. Okay. So what happens during a C3PAO assessment and how to be ready for each phase? So assessment day reality, this is where it gets real, right? So document review. Now, mind you, we talked about adequacy and sufficiency, right? Phase one, assessors do a cursory look at, the evidence that has been provided, basically making sure that all 110, 320 controls, assessment objectives have evidence mapped to them. But during assessment, we are going to dive deeper into it, okay? So this is where the adequacy and sufficiency comes in. So assessors are going to review your SSP policies and evidence package. Basically, make sure everything is organized, labeled, and accessible, right? If it is a repository you're leveraging, make sure assessors have access to that environment. Don't hand over a folder of unnamed files for the assessor to figure out what is what, right? You don't want to do that. And then there is a technical testing. So a live system, walkthrough. Okay. Like Sean mentioned, there are three assessment methodologies available to assessors. Now, we don't have to use all three, right? So the examination, interview, and testing. The testing piece is normally a live system walkthrough. We want to validate configurations, an individual telling us, actually walking us through the entire process. So your people, personnel, must be able to demonstrate what the SSP is actually describing. It doesn't always have to be the case, but there are some controls that will need someone actually performing a live system walkthrough. And then interviews and corroboration. Interviews with a security lead system admins. Once again, we go back to making sure personnel are ready. They are actually knowledgeable about the controls, right? Assessors are going to test whether your staff actually follow the procedures that have been documented. And then findings and closeout. So preliminary findings are going to be reviewed. Now, this is a little bit different. Depending on the control, the weight of the control, there are some controls that might find their way onto poems, right? Those are what we call the limited deficiency control. So some of the controls that are weighted one, they can't find their way onto poems. Make sure those poem items are identified. Now, throughout the assessment day, you are going to be given the opportunity to provide evidence, further evidence. So let's say, for instance, you provided an access control policy, 3.1.1, right? There was a policy that was provided. There were some minor gaps that were identified, control, the policy, date wasn't updated. Maybe just a little, date gap here and there. You will be given the opportunity in such situations. Now, this would also depend on some assessors, because I've heard some assessors that, score a client just a little date, not right, failing them. It depends on the assessor, but there are some situations where minor tweaks here and there could be done, right? So you will be given the opportunity, right? But not to add new evidence that wasn't ready. Mind you, this is the difference here, right? The evidence you provided, there was a little gap missing, yet you will be provided the opportunity to clarify, but you're not adding any new evidence. That is the reason why 30 days, 60 days, make sure you got all that stuff put together and ready to go. Okay, so what assessors actually accept versus what they will push back. Controls that are documented, compensating controls documented in SSP with clear rationale and equivalent protection, right? So we are not doing this, but this is how we do it, right? There's no prescriptive way for you to meet a control. Definitely the assessment guide, walks you through the examination, interview, some of the stuff that you need to provide. Maybe an assessor is asking for this particular thing. That's not what we are doing, but we are using this, or we are doing it this way. Make sure you document that. Cloud service inheritance documented. This is also a big one, right? Cloud service provider, cloud service offering. If it's a cloud service provider that is storing, processing, transmitting CUI, definitely FedRAMP will come into play here. So make sure we have your cloud service provider or offering has gone through the FedRAMP process, or have been assessed by a third party, and they can provide an attestation letter or an equivalency. Partial implementation with honest poem and milestone-driven remediation. We just don't want to see anything out there, poems that haven't been closed out, worked on, nothing like that. And then if you are providing a configuration, a screenshot, right, make sure there's a timestamp, host name, the tool, that kind of stuff. Nothing generic on data screenshots that could be from any system at any time. So these are some of the things that we look out for as assessors, and some of the stuff that we will push back on. So a roadmap, I put something down here. Day one, a 90-day model, that you could use, scoping and assessing, basically things that we've gone over, documentation and remediation, and then basically validating that package to make sure that everything is good to go. If there's anything missing, if there are any remediations that needs to be done on poems, get it done, collect your evidence, and then go ahead. Most importantly, you're good to go. go ahead, start even talking to, C3PAOs, right? Because there are some that are scheduling, 3 to 9 months out, right? So as you're going through readiness, start talking to some of these C3PAOs out there and get your C3PAO assessment scheduled out. So takeaways, assessment readiness is not a sprint to a finish line, okay? It's the discipline of operating every day like an assessor is watching. Don't just be in a hurry to, put things together and say, I'm good to go, right? Just make sure you think, and just like we talked about, think like an assessor. If I was an assessor, what would I be asking for this particular control or particular objective? Those are some of the things that you need to be looking out for. So we talked about scoping, making sure that partial implementations are being worked on. Your SSP is basically the spine of your documentation. Every artifact, policy, and procedure traces back to that. And then remediating, not everything can be done at once, right? So prioritize them. Quick wins are good. They buy time and actually gives you the extra, motivation to get moving. And then readiness is behavioral, right? Your team must be able to demonstrate, not just document stuff. They should be able to talk to each one of those assessment controls and objectives. Okay. All right. So that is it. I hope we do have some time for Q&A.
We have just about 2 minutes, so we can get maybe one or two questions in here, but this was fantastic. Thank you so much. And Kevin, if you want to ask a question, if not, I've got a few here that I could ask.
Kevin, I think you muted.
Sorry, I took myself off video, but not mute. I apologize for that. So you had mentioned cage codes, and you said the one customer wasn't sure about or didn't know their cage code.
Yes.
Just because we do have some people that are new to the DIB, if you will. Can you further kind of explain what that is and how they might get that?
Yeah. So I think there is a cage code finder. I don't have that URL website on top of my mind right now, but there is a cage code finder that you can really go in the as search parameters. You can put in your organization name and find out what your cage code is if you are not sure. So that is the one piece, right? But the cage code is something that you need to do business with Uncle Sam, especially when it comes to the DoD. As a contractor, you need that. I don't think there is any assessor that will entertain a C3P assessment without a cage code, right?
Absolutely. And I just will give people a hint. If you're not quite sure of, if you go to the Supplier Performance Risk System website, it actually tells you there how to get a cage code if you don't have it.
Exactly.
So you do a search on SPRS, Supplier Performance Risk System, it'll come up with that site. So Lawrence, I want to thank you because we are out of time. So thanks so much for your for participating today. Love the presentation. Kim, anything to add before I jump in?
Just that, yeah, thank you, Lawrence. We have now gone through scoping and controls. We talked through documentation and remediation, and now we're going to bring it together. And yeah, going to hand it back over to you, Kevin.
Thanks. Before I start with Ria and Michael, want to just kind of remind everybody, in my earlier session, I spoke with Doug from Synertex, an Exostar customer. In that, he mentioned enclaves, he mentioned tools, etc. I just wanted to kind of let everybody know that with Doug's permission, Synertex is an Exostar customer. They utilize our managed on Microsoft 365 enclave solution, our Policy Pro, and our Certification Assistant to help them get ready for both their assessment and to have that ongoing enclave. So, Doug, anything I missed there that you wanted to bring up?
Oh, nothing you missed. I'm hoping that my video stays on this time. No, I mean, for us, I mean, I guess the one thing that I want to mention to folks is that it was actually the power of the Policy Pro tool that got us to then buy into the certification assistant tool, which then got us to buy into EMM 365. And it was all, the previous product ended up being the proof or the evidence that we needed to have more confidence, as we went to buy in more and buy in more and buy in more to Exostar's solution set. But I will say, extremely pleased with it. I will say that we used the certification assistant tool and the data that we put into it during our C3PAO audit. And if anybody has any questions about that, I'm more than happy to answer those things, offline if anybody wants to have a more, lengthier discussion about that.
Thanks so much, Doug, and thanks for hanging in there.
You got it.
So everybody, now on the next session, as Kim mentioned, we started with obviously an overview, went to a practitioner, right, with Doug and Synertex. We've talked to the MSPs and the RPOs who can help you get ready for the assessment. And now we're going to talk to the C3PAOs themselves. So Exostar partners with C3PAO organizations. In this case, we've got representatives from our partner NSF and our partner Align to kind of talk about that assessment. So I'm going to first ask Ria and Mike to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Ria. Ria, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kevin. Can you guys hear me okay? All right.
You can. Yeah, you're
I
good.
appreciate that. Thanks, Kevin. I've been with NSF for over 12 years. I'm the Senior Manager of Information Security, also a lead CCA with NSF. I've been involved in one capacity or the other with all of our CMMC assessments, so I'm happy to be here to share insights gained from my experience. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Mike, you want to start? You want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Awesome to be here. Thank you guys so much. I'm really looking forward to this. My name is Mike Brooks. My background, I'm a retired Air Force Cyber Operations Officer. I've been a CISO twice. I'm a lead CMMC certified assessor. I'm also a provisional instructor. I've done about north of 100 NIST 800-171 gap analysis and level 2 assessments. And I'm a huge believer in sharing the feedback and lessons learned, because that's how we get better and raise the bar across the DIB. And, that's what we're looking forward to today. And I also want to introduce my sidekick. This is Hoot. So he helps me from time to time. So I just want to introduce him.
I've seen him on your post as well, Mike. So I'm going to start today's session just kind of giving an overview of kind of where we are in getting the DIB CMMC certified. So the slides you see here, the numbers you see here, were what I got when I attended the CS5 West conference in San Diego. These were numbers presented by Matt Travis from the Cyber AB. So as you see, right, we've got about 1,144 organizations that are now level 2 CMMC certified. Now, depending on which number you take of the size of the DIB, either 50 to 80,000, somewhere in there, you can see we've still got a long way to go. So, if you're depending, if you're not quite there yet, you're in good company, but everyone needs to get there. And then obviously you see the numbers of the different people and roles that are involved in the CMMC process. Now, as you start to get ready to engage with a C3PAO, you're going to want to, understand or know that you have everything or that you're ready to actually engage. So I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview of those different things you're going to need before you engage with that C3PAO. And the first thing I'm going to always suggest people start with is a data flow diagram. Understand how CUI comes into your organization, where it enters, how it flows through your organization, both the systems and, as we talked about before, the people themselves. Understand how that goes, because that's going to, at the end of the day, determine the scope of your overall system security plan. And that's what you need to build. You need to build a system security plan. And the C3POs are going to ask you for this. They're going to say, hey, show me your system security plan. And as part of that, you should have a data flow diagram that illustrates your system for them. And along with that, you should also include that system diagram, right? Those things, those actual, network diagram of hardware, software, firewalls, et cetera, that make up your overall system boundary. Take into account all those different things that are part of it. All those things that store, process, or transmit CUI, or protect those things that do. And now you also may have things that are out of scope, and that's okay. And you can illustrate in the diagram those things as well, but make sure those are counted as out of scope. Because at the end of the day, you get to determine the scope, you get to determine that boundary. That's what you share with the C3PO, and that's what they're going to validate and test when they come on site. Now, when you build your system security plan, you're going to want to look at NIST 800-171 R2. Now, I understand Rev 3 is on the street, and depending on which government organization you're actually working with, they may tell you to look at a different one. But when we're talking about CMMC, CMMC is affiliated with the Department of War, right? This is their rule, their regulation. They specifically call out R2. So understand that, right? These are the 14 categories or the 14 control families, I should say. And there are 110 controls within these categories. But when you start to think about your your system security plan, don't think about that 110 number because it's much more involved than that. Really think about the 320 controls and what you need to do around those individual controls to validate what you do. Now, this is a page taken directly from NIST 800-171 Alpha, the assessment guide. This is a great tool to use to understand what you need to include in your system security plan around each of these different objectives. You'll see these determine if statements. Those are the individual objectives that you need to get down to. This gives you the kind of evidence you need to gather, what you need to train your individual people on, and what you need to do to test and review around these things. So please use this as your guide when you're doing your own internal assessment to see if you're ready to engage your C3PO and get them started. Because the C3POs have a deterministic way to actually do the assessment. And that's kind of what you see here, right? These are the assessment phases that you'll go through with that C3PO organization. There will be a pre-assessment phase. This is when they'll start to ask you to provide your system security plan and an overview of that evidence. That's where then you have the assessment itself. This is when they're going to do those objective testings of those different individual objectives. This is when they're going to decide, depending on which objective it is this something I'm going to test for? Is this something we're going to actually interview somebody on your team on how you do it? And we're going to see if your system security plan matches what you actually do in practice. Then we're going to, they're going to outbrief you typically every day, but there'll be a final outbrief as well. How did we do? What did we do? And then they'll issue the certification and or not, right? And determine what you've got to do. Now, what we asked Mike and Ria to do was tell us kind of in your experience, right? And both Ria and Mike have done a number of assessments. They've been doing this for quite a while. And to kind of come up with kind of your 10 pitfalls, And so we're going to round robin this. We're going to bring up the different pitfalls. Mike's going to take number 1, Ree's going to take number 2, etc. I'll ask each of them kind of to comment on it, etc. Then we'll open it up to questions. So please, because most people have been putting questions into the chat, and that's great. So let's go ahead and do that, if you will. So if you've got questions of a C3PO that you want to ask, go ahead and start putting those in the chat as we go through. I'll try to get through as many of those as we can at the end of today's session. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into those pitfalls. So the first one, and I'm going to ask Mike to take the first one, is about scoping itself. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Yeah, this is, again, I'm foot stomping right now. This is the most important thing. This drives the entire assessment process. And so what do we mean when we say scoping? I mean, it's very easy to say scoping is the most important thing, but what do we actually mean when we say scoping? If you look at the DoD scoping guide for level 2, which is published, there are 9 musts in there. The OSC must. There are specific things that an OSC must do to define their scope. The most important thing and the most unique thing to CMMC is you have to categorize your assets appropriately. There are 5 specific asset categories. And when we mean assets, we're talking about people, technology, and facilities. We need to know what that type of asset is in your environment, what it does. Is it a CUI asset? Is it a security protection asset? Is it a contractor risk managed asset? Is it a specialized asset? Is it an out of scope asset? Because that drives the entire assessment plan around those assets. And so that is critically important. The data flow is also critically important. That's another thing that we're looking at with regards to scoping. When we start to review the SSP, poor scoping just jumps off the page at you, whether it's the diagram or the control implementation statements, and you're talking about how you're implementing the control and what you're doing for access control and how you're managing that through Entra ID or whatever you're using, but you're not addressing how people are getting access to the security protection assets. You're not addressing, the full scope of in-scope assets, which, is problematic when we get into the assessment. With regards to the assessment process and the importance of scoping, this is one of the things that we do. It's one of the critical tasks that we have to do in phase 1, which is the pre-assessment phase. One of the key tasks in that phase is the lead CCA has to validate the scope. They have to make a decision on whether or not the scope is accurate. And when we talk about false starts, when we talk about, companies getting stuck, that is usually where it occurs, is because the scoping hasn't been done correctly. So scoping is super important. It's very important to get it right. At the tail end of the last session, there was conversations around cage codes. Organizational scoping is also important, because if you get your cage codes wrong, meaning you give us the wrong cage codes and we issue your certificate against those cage codes, we cannot crack that assessment back open and add additional cage codes later. That's going to drive a reassessment. So it's very important to get your organizational scoping right and your system scoping right. If you don't do that, you're going to run into issues. And again, foot stomp this, go to the CMMC Level 2 scoping guide, make sure you're reading that, make sure your readiness partners are reading that, and make sure you're aware of what your requirements are with regards to scoping. This is 100% within your control. You define this. And so take control of your scoping, draw it as small as possible. That would be my recommendation, but be clear on what your scope is and be ready to validate that scope with your lead CCA in phase 1, ideally before that.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Rhea, anything you want to add on the scoping topic?
I think Mike covered it all, but if there is one domino that falls, the first one is scoping. So yes, very important. That's been the topic throughout the whole summit. So I agree with that. That is definitely the most important aspect of the CMMC assessment, is getting that scoping right. Thank you.
Great. So we did have one question that came in kind of periodically today that came up. It was about cage codes and about organizations that have multiple cage codes. Do they need a separate SSP for each cage code? Can you piggyback an SSP? How do you guys handle organizations with multiple cage codes?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is something that comes up a lot, in our conversations, in our early on conversations around scoping. You can handle it several different ways. Some companies, based on how they're structured, they want all of the subordinate cage codes in scope. We have some that are as large as 50 to 70 cage codes, subordinate cage codes. We have other clients that we work with that want very specific scoped cage codes by business unit because there's specific set-asides, there's specific business reasons why they want to isolate that particular cage code based on a contract vehicle and things like that. So it really depends. You have the flexibility to define your assessment scope, but the key part of this is making sure that whatever you want your assessment scope to be relative to your cage codes is reflective accurately in the DoD systems, in the DLA systems where the cage codes are present, which pulls from sam.gov. 15 years ago, when your cage code was created, nobody really looked at it because it didn't really matter. Now it matters, and you need to really understand what your cage code is because it impacts your CMMC Level 2 assessment scope, and it's what your certificate gets issued on. Your higher level cage code and all your in-scope cage codes go on your CMMC Level 2 certificate. So you could do it either way. It really is a business risk decision and really a business decision.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Thanks so much.
Just to add on to that too, Kevin. If you're using the same information system for all your cage codes, you can actually include all of those cage codes in the one SSP, just as long as it's all part of that same information system that is reflected in your SSP. You can use one SSP.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So next one is for you about those determination statements.
All right. So assessors, we're going to evaluate the determination statements for all 320 of those assessment objectives, not just the 110 practices that many OSCs really prepare against. This is where, well-intentioned mature security programs often get tripped up because the controls are missing. It's really the evidence is mapped to a high level. And why does this matter? Well, organizations will end up receiving not met findings even when the intent of the practice is clearly implemented. So the miss, that usually comes down to a specific determination objective that was explicitly addressed, that was not explicitly addressed or demonstrated. And what's the best approach to tackle this? You want to identify every determination statement across, NIST 800, 171, 171A, the Level 2 assessment guide. You want to map specific current artifacts to each of those determination statements, not just to a policy or a shared control. And you want to ensure that, the teams are trained to recognize and speak, determination statement language, not just the internal shortcuts that, we're all used to speaking. So that's really the main thing is, Mike will probably cover this later, but interviews too, that's kind of, that's a big one too, is you want to make sure that, everyone internal, anyone who touches CUI, they all understand the language to speak to and that it's reflective of your SSP.
Great, thanks. Mike, anything to add to that, Mike?
That was awesome, Rhea. She's exactly right. The only thing I would add to that is just in those determination statements, the verbs matter a great deal. If it says define the thing, all you have to do is define the thing. That meets the objective. What we are trying to do is turn those objective statements true or validate that they're false. Once they're true, we can move on to the next one. All of the objective statements have to be true in order for the control to be satisfied. So they're not additional requirements. They're the pieces and parts that make up the thing that provide the validation that the control is met. So pay attention to the verbs. If you don't know what they mean, look them up. And if they're not defined and you need to define them, define them for yourself and, hold your position in terms of, hey, we define monitor as, and then prove you're doing what you say you're doing.
Great, thanks. All right, Mike, what about the CUI data flow? I talked about that up front, but it seems to be still tripping people up. So what are we doing here?
Yeah, so this is the life cycle of CUI coming in, through, and out of the organization. So it's not just where's your CUI organizationally, right? It's how do you receive it? Who do you receive it from? What do you do with it once you have it? And then who do you send it to? Whether you're sending it back to the person you got it from, you're sending it down the supply chain. The way I refer to this is anything that CUI touches, you can consider federally protected land. And it's subject to the 110 security controls. We have to do the full assessment on anything that is considered a CUI asset, which means it stores, processes, and transmits CUI. There are not that many firm requirements in NIST Standard 171. It's actually not that prescriptive. Neither is CMMC, but this is one of the areas that is very prescriptive. If you're going to store, process, or transmit CUI in the cloud, you have to use a FedRAMP authorized cloud service provider or a FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud service provider. And this is something that trips up a lot of people because they're not aware of those requirements. And there's a DoD memo that's been out since 2023 that spells this out. So this is usually not an IT exercise. This is across the business. You need to understand, where does the CUI come in? What are our contractual requirements? Who's receiving it? What do we do with it once we get it? And then where does it flow out of the organization? We also talk a lot about, with our manufacturing clients, about operational technology, right? Well, what about the CUI and the operational technology? Well, there's a specific category called specialized assets, which covers operational technology, IoT. It covers 5 or 6 different specialized asset types. And getting the CUI into the operational technology is one thing, but once it's in the operational technology and you're running a CNC machine that's on a Windows 7 operating system, with it being a specialized asset, you're no longer expected to meet the 110 security controls to the level that you would if it was a CUI asset. You get a little bit of latitude on those specialized assets to develop a risk-based approach for how you might be scanning that CNC machine in that Windows 7 operating system, because you can't put CrowdStrike on it because it wouldn't work on there. And so there's a connection between the CUI asset to the specialized asset in a lot of the manufacturing space. And that's another key area of things, because as you're making the pieces and parts that go into the weapon systems, there's a lot of manufacturing going on. But CUI data flow, the easiest way to do this is with a picture, with a diagram, and walk the dog from the beginning all the way to the end. And anywhere that CUI flows, light that up and be ready to implement the 110 controls and document that in your system security plan.
Thanks. Rhea, anything to add on the CUI data flow?
No, Mike covered it all. I mean, that is your foundation for the assessment. So make sure that that's accurate.
Okay, so we did have a question come in that I think kind of pertains to this area. It's about derived CUI, and right, I receive CUI, I make something of it, right? I document that I do those things. So that's typically derived CUI that I've created. How is that accounted for, or are you as a C3PO looking at how they designate CUI? I'll let Rhea, if you have a thought on that one.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So if it's labeled as CUI, if it's derived CUI, that's something that's internally created. You kind of want to look at it too as, where is it going? Is it leaving the organization? If it is leaving the organization, then that is CUI, and you have to protect it as such. And you have to label it as such too. And so as an assessor, we're looking at all of that. We're looking at your derived CUI. We're looking at the CUI that you receive, how you're protecting all of that. And so that's all part of, where you want to securely store your CUI. We're looking at all of that.
Great. All right, let's go on to the next one. So the next one is the SSP itself. Rhea, this one's for you.
Yes. So, I mean, the SSP, that's also foundational here. The SSP is essentially what the assessment is graded against, right? So the SSP is your single source of truth for the entire engagement. Like Kevin mentioned, that's what we ask for during even when we're doing an engagement, or even before the contract is signed, we're asking, do you have your SSP? Is that in place? And so that's something that we're looking at during that phase 1. We want to make sure that you have that in place. Everything is approved. It's not a draft version. You want to have that final version moving forward. We don't assessors, we don't evaluate how you intend to operate. We validate whether your environment matches, what the SSP is saying today. So why does this matter? In every successful assessment, the SSP describes reality. So current tools, real processes, named owners, present tense, as Mike mentioned. You want to make sure that your language is there. So the future state language, your placeholders, generic descriptions, those will create, credibility issues. So those will bring up a lot of questions for the assessors. And unlike other controls, this one's an absolute. So no SSP means no assessment. All right. And so what looks good? So you want every control written in present tense, specific tool names. You want configuration details, clearly identified responsible individuals, the terminology that aligns cleanly with the CMMC assessment guide and the NIST 800-171A. So assessors don't have to, make that interpretation. The SSP should be treated as a living document, updated every time a control, tool, person, or process changes. You want to make sure that that's always in place and, you're working on a final approved version at that point.
Thanks. Mike, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just say, there's no prescribed length on what a control statement needs to be. So just answer the 5 W's, be as concise as you can possibly be, address the verb in the objective statement in the SSP. So if we're looking for what is the time period that is defined, start the statement off, the defined time period is 10 minutes, not 3 paragraphs of once upon a time, there was this and there was that. And then, a page and a half later, we find out that, it's 10 minutes for session timeout. Address things right up front, be clear at that. Another area that we see a lot of area for improvement or opportunity is there's a lot of inheritance, especially when you're leveraging awesome solutions like the Exostar managed enclave, right? Understand what you're inheriting. You can't just put your portion in there. You really need to think about end-to-end the control in terms of your MSP, your MSSP, your CSP, all of your ESPs. You don't have to go into great detail, but if you are inheriting any portion of the control, you should put traceability back into the SSP of where you're inheriting that control from. And I always like personal preference. I always like to add the validation mechanism as well in the SSP. What are we using to validate that the control is working appropriately? What do we expect to see? What is the desired output? That just helps, with the evidence and the scavenger hunts that go on, downstream of collecting all the things you need to prove you're doing the things that you're saying.
Yeah, great. So we got a question that came in a little bit about scoping, a little bit about the SSP itself. It says, there we go. Oops, sorry, lost it there for a minute. So they said, they asked, can we clarify, when we say an asset needs to meet all 110 controls, is it the system that meets it, or does each individual asset within the system need to have all 110?
If it's a CUI asset, that particular asset, whether that's an application or a facility that's processing CUI or a CUI authorized user, those controls apply to that particular asset to the degree that that asset is storing, processing, or transmitting CUI. So it applies to each individual asset, not just to the CUI assets, but also to the security protection assets. So when you're describing how you're provisioning access in your GCC environment, in your SSP, you also need to be talking about how you're provisioning firewall access and who has access to that, and whether or not you're using SSO and Entra ID and what's the identity. All of that has to be wrapped around in terms of how you're implementing the control.
Okay. And then I think we touched about this one a little bit already, but Michael, this one's on yours, on those approved applications. Because these are one of those pitfalls that people fall into, right? I signed up for so-and-so. They do everything. Boom. My SSP is just the name of my cloud service.
Yeah. So, you decide what you're using in your environment, but, every application, and when we talk about scoping, applications are in scope because they're assets, right? Is it a CUI asset? Is it a security protection asset? What is it doing? And if you start to expand your number of applications, let's say you're using 50 to 100 to 200 applications, now you've got configuration management controls around all 200 of those applications. You've got additional change management controls. You've got vulnerability management controls. What are those applications that are approved for use inside of the environment? That should be a very discrete approved list of what you're using. And then you are required to either, have a blacklisting or a whitelisting policy in terms of how you add new applications into the environment. This matters because there's a lot of things that are running in a particular environment. And, if you're using applications that don't show up on your asset inventory, that aren't listed in your scoping diagram, that we haven't talked about, and then we get to page 47 of your SSP and we find out you're using, some password tool that's you've never mentioned before and we've never seen before, that's going to create a flag. Or if we start to look at scan reports and we start to see applications that are being scanned that aren't in your asset inventory or in your approved application list, that's also going to raise concern. So you're not doing this for us, you're doing it for you. You really should know what those approved applications are, and they should have a purpose and a function inside of the environment to help you do the things that you need to do. Change control is critically important. The business wants to use lots of things. I totally understand that, totally get that. Just have a disciplined process to add those to the roster and manage the, the configuration of those and the security posture of those, as you move forward.
Okay. And just, Rhea, anything you want to add before I ask the question that came in about that?
Oh, I just wanted to say, as an assessor, from an assessor's perspective, we look at, anything that's unapproved. It represents an unknown risk, right? So regardless of, how long that's been in your system, we want to know that that's been approved and it's compliant.
Okay. So with that understanding, right? And the question of when, we've got the 3-year period between assessments, but there's also that period of doing a reassessment when significant changes occur to the environment, or however that's termed. That's termed. Is an introduction of a new application enough to trigger that, or something else?
You want me to take that one, or?
Yeah, sure, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, so the answer is it depends. There is no defined definition of what a significant change is. CMMC is a continuous compliance program. It is not a get certified once every 3-year program. We're going to get to this, I think, on the last slide, which I think is the most important part of your entire CMMC program, which is your affirming official. That's the person that's legally attesting to your continuous compliance every year. They ought to have a vote on what's a significant change versus what's not. And that should come through your change management. And again, take the liberty of defining it for yourself if it's not defined. We define a significant change as, and if you've got questions, you can reach out to your C3PAO and say, hey, in your view, would this trigger a significant change? Is this a scope increase? Is it is this going to drive an assessment change to our current assessment? In a lot of cases, we stay with the organizations that we've certified in the interim years, and we provide support kind of going forward for this exact reason, because it is a bit of a gray space in terms of, what's a significant change versus what's not. But again, I think if it pushes the scope and expands the scope or dramatically changes, it probably has the potential to be a significant change. And I would definitely make sure that the affirming official, at a minimum, has eyes on that and has a chance to weigh in.
Thanks. So actually, I got ahead of myself a little bit, because the next pitfall, if you will, is what I was talking about with shared responsibilities, right? And I had mentioned the application side, right? Exostar provides a FedRAMP moderate equivalent cloud service. We provide a shared responsibility matrix. We work with partners like NSF and Align to review that periodically and make sure we provide the right level of detail, both around our shared responsibility matrix and our body of evidence that we have to provide alongside that. But it's not only applications and cloud services that do that. Your MSPs and folks that also are part of that will also have that shared responsibility. So Rhea, you want to talk about that, the shared responsibility?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. So shared responsibility matrix. Well, if you have a FedRAMP authorization, if you're using a cloud service provider that has a FedRAMP authorization, that does not necessarily equal CMMC compliance. The control objectives need to still be individually demonstrated by the OSC unless full inheritance is explicitly supported and documented. the SRM, it's consistently misunderstood. There's a lot of OSDs that look at that SRM and they just see inherited and they say, oh yeah, we inherit, 99% of these controls. And that's not the case. So to point to a cloud service provider or an external service provider saying that, oh, they're the ones that are doing all of this, that's not sufficient. We require proof of what you claim to inherit and why that's the case. We want to make sure that SRM is detailed. And like I did get a chance to look at the Exostar SRM, and that's very well done. It's well defined. You understand what's shared, what's the responsibility for Exostar, what's the OSC's responsibility. That's what you want to look at. You want to make sure that is well defined, that you're understanding what it is that you're sharing with your external service provider or cloud service provider, and you want to understand what it is that you yourself as an OSC are responsible for, and that's normally governance and training, your own personnel. So you just want to make sure that you get that written documentation for each of the ESPs confirming their compliance postures for those specific control and practices, and that what you're inheriting from them. So you want to make sure that is also referenced, that SRM is referenced in your SSP, and it's also part of your evidence package. This is really one of the first things that as assessor will ask for.
Great. Mike, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is awesome that I just like, yes, exactly. Most of the shared responsibility, probably 9.5 times out of 10, exactly what Rhea said, it's a partial responsibility. It is not a full inheritance. And so you just want to understand what your responsibility is. That should be specified as a customer responsibility. Inheritance is a very, very, very good thing. It is a matter of fact, if you go to the DoD, the new RMF, it's a strategic tenet of how the DoD itself manages information security risk on its own systems. So you just need to understand what you're inheriting, what you're responsible for, and it should simplify things. The last point I'll make on this is it's not just CUI for your external service providers. It's also security protection data. You need shared responsibility matrices for any external service providers that you have that are storing, processing, or transmitting security protection data. So this is your SOC, your SIM SOC provider potentially. If you're using a cloud security product, anything like that is also going to be in scope here, and that's detailed in the CMMC scoping guide.
Great. So I think, Mike, you get the next one about the thing that everyone loves the most, the interviews.
I'm going to let Hoot answer this one. No, I'm just kidding. Prep your people, please. Like, don't have them coming into these calls grumpy and upset because they have to be in the call and a little bit miffed at the I've done assessments where, there's one guy that's responsible for the thing, and he jumps in the call and he's come out of another call and he doesn't know what he's doing, or she's busy, and it's just like, oh, what do you need? What is this for? Why am I here? It's like, oh, hey, I'm just checking to make sure that you're doing the log review. We don't do log reviews. It's like, oh, you don't do log reviews at all? No, we don't do log reviews. Okay, you don't do log reviews. The assessment's over at this point. It's like, so just, again, take the time, do the dry runs. You're doing self-assessments anyway. Like, use that time to really prep your folks. Make sure they understand the control requirements. Make sure they understand, the validation mechanism, that evidence that you are internally looking at that says, yes, this light is green. We believe this light is green because we have this thing. And have them talk to that. Have them talk to, the policy, the procedure, and how they do things. We get the other end of the spectrum too, where people get very, very chatty and they start talking about all kinds of things. And, well, we have a change control process, but we don't follow it because nobody here takes it serious. And, and it's like, whoa, hold on a second. So this is another one of those things that is 100% within your control. And, this is an area that you can really, really represent yourself well. We will do interviews. We have 3 assessment methods: examine, interview, test. Normally on a level 2 assessment, we're doing at least 2 of those, maybe all 3. So we're going to examine all your documents, but we're going to also interview all your control owners, whether those are internal resources or from your MSP or your MSSP. So a lot hinges on the interviews. Have them stick to the evidence, have them stick to the story, and it should be no issue at all. It's a dialogue. It's not an interrogation.
Thanks, Mike. Rhea, anything on your experience on the interview process?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that, if there's anything that's inconsistent, as an assessor, we're obligated to validate which version reflects reality. So like, as Mike mentioned, make sure that whoever is being interviewed, they are familiar with the SSP, they're familiar with what it is that is documented, and that reflects reality.
Great. Okay. Next one is, well, if we don't quite get everything passed and we got to open some POAMs, what's the story about POAMs?
Yes.
Read this one for you.
Thanks, Kevin. So plan of actions and milestones, right? So POAM's not a wish list. It's a legal commitment with a clock attached to it. So a POAM, it carries a hard 180-day deadline. It should be treated like a contractual obligation. Once you claim a POAM, you are committing. You're not proposing to remediation. So conditional certificates, they allow POAMs to certain controls. And so when the assessor finds that the plan is credible and executable, you're able to move on with that. But every POAM should include that control ID, a named responsible individual, your interim mitigation steps, and really that realistic milestone date. So just to emphasize, once you have that POAM ready, you can have it done before your 180 days. You want to engage that C3PAO early, ideally before that initial assessment concludes, just so that you can have, that date in place that's scheduled, so that you can have that 180 days, so that that window doesn't close on you before your, so that you can get on the schedule with your C3PAO. You want to make sure that, once you have that in place, get that closed out with your C3PAO so that you can get your final cert. But in the meantime, that conditional cert, if you are past that date of your conditional cert, then at that point, you really have to start over with an assessment. There's really no turning back if you miss that date.
So that's that 180-day date that they talk about. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Mike, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add to this, of the 1,200-ish level 2 third-party certs that have been issued, less than 4% have been conditional. So I think the model is proving that it's actually pretty hard to get the 5-pointers and the 3-pointers right and miss a 1-pointer, although it does happen, but it's not, certainly not the norm, sitting at about 4% of the total number. The other key thing about POAMs that sometimes gets overlooked is inside of your own cycle. Again, we talked about this being a continuous compliance program. You are allowed operational plans of actions, right, which are slightly different than a POAM. So there can be, deficiencies as you operate over time, but you just need to remediate those. And when you get to your level 2, third-party assessment, try to go into that having 0. I mean, that's the goal, is to not have any for the assessment, and get those all cleaned up.
Great, thanks. So Mike, you get the next one on physical and media controls. Awesome.
This is one actually that we see a lot of trouble with, surprisingly, to me, surprisingly. What's the trouble that we see? Well, at the physical site, for those companies that have on-prem infrastructure or processing CUI, just not understanding what the control requirements are and not doing the things that are, required by the control. So from a physical security standpoint, monitoring the facility, monitoring the access, controlling the access. A lot of companies are operating in shared spaces, and so there isn't really anybody at the front desk. There isn't a front desk. You can walk right into the facility and, just walk right into Suite 5, and, you can walk around Suite 5 and you can sit in somebody's cubicle and nobody would even know, and that person is potentially working on CUI. So those are some of the things we see on the physical side. With regards to media, USB drives, removable hard drives, physical CUI, printers, all of that stuff has to be controlled in line with the requirements. Media protection has its own control family. I think there's 8 controls. Don't quote me on that. I've got the guide. I would always go back to the guide. And physical security, there's not that many either. So, there's a dozen or so controls here, and we actually see this trip up a lot of people. The other area that we see a lot is, 10.6 is alternate work sites, right? There needs to be guidance put in place. I call them the pool rules, right? No running, no headfirst diving, right? You need to put in place a set of rules or rules of engagement for home offices, travel. What's allowed? Can I do it on the airplane? Do I have to wait till I get to the hotel room? When I get to the hotel room, what should I do? Have the locked door? Don't have any? What are those rules around the alternate work sites? That's where a lot of the CUI processing is occurring. It's actually occurring from people's homes, on travel, from these alternate work sites, and the physical security controls around those alternate work sites are in a lot of cases lacking.
Good point. Good point. Rhea, anything to add there?
No, Mike covered it all. Thank
Sounds
you.
good. All right, so Rhea, you're next with the affirming official.
All right. So the affirming official, they're not just signing a form, they're actually making a personal legal attestation, right? So the affirming official needs to provide an annual legal affirmation that the organization has implemented and will maintain its CMMC posture. That affirmation does carry, false claims exposure if it's inaccurate or incomplete, or if it's based on assumptions rather than verified fact. So under the 32 CFR and then the DFAR 7012 clause, a senior executive must affirm in SPURS every year continued compliance. And an inaccurate affirmation alone may trigger liability. So make sure that you identify who your affirming official is now, not at the time of the affirmation. And you want your affirming official to know, what are they signing? What annual reoccurrence means operationally as well, and then the legal exposure if the assertion is wrong. So really, what you want to do then, organizationally, establish that formal compliance verification process tied to to the annual SPRS affirmation date. Your affirming official should affirm based on the current verified posture, not last year's assessment or any type of informal assurance, and document your affirming official's review process as well.
Great, thanks. Mike, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add, the DoD works off of leadership accountability. That's how it runs. That's what this is. Having been an authorizing official on the DoD side, I can tell you I don't like surprises in the annual package or in the annual review. The other thing with the affirming official, they own the program legally. This is a great opportunity to build an advocate and a champion in the business to drive things forward for the IT manager who got the program, flopped on his desk, and go find the affirming official. If the affirming official isn't designated, do that as a first step. Build a champion, get leadership visibility and accountability over the program, and use that individual to drive this program forward, because at the end of the day, they own it. They take the last step in a CMMC Level 2 certification. We don't just issue a certificate and go away. When we're done and completed our assessment, the last step in the process is the affirming official has to log into SPRS and accept the results of our Level 2 third-party assessment. Once they do that, that is the passing of the baton to the OSC, and that leader now owns, as Rhea said, continuous compliance, is legally accountable for an annual affirmation and also managing it day to day. So it's a huge leadership responsibility. There's a lot of affirming officials out there that don't know they're the affirming official. They're finding out, at the 11th hour, oh, congrats, you're the affirming official. But again, I would say just use it as an opportunity to drive the program forward and attach leadership accountability to it, because that's what it's designed to do.
Great. So we actually do have some time for some questions, and I've been copying some down as they come. And obviously I asked some as we went through that as I pertained, but got a couple more that came in. So Michael, I'm going to ask you this one first because you brought it up. So what's the difference between a POAM and an operational plan of action?
So a POAM is relative to how you are assessed for your formal assessment, the plan of actions and milestones, right? Which there are specific rules called out in the CMMC final rule around what you are allowed to carry forward as a POAM. There's a DoD assessment methodology and scoring associated with all of the controls. And so that's all in the final rule. That is what a POAM is with regards to CMMC specifically. An operational a POAM or operational action plan is those operational deficiencies that happen, right? That maybe we can't do the patch for another 2 days because it's going to impact the business. So we're going to on Wednesday do the patch, and we've got an operational plan of action to monitor this and then do the patch. Those are the things that are expected as you're managing your program on the day-to-day. So the operational action plans are more based on the tactical day-to-day operating of the program. The POAM is more how you're graded on the final exam. So make sure when you get to that final exam, you don't really have any POAMs, right? You should remediate all of those. But then maybe a week later, you might, because you're processing something or something happened or something broke and something needs to be fixed. And so it isn't, you have to maintain 100% compliance all the time. That's impossible, right? Things happen all the time. And so that's what the operational plan of action is really intended and used for. And that was a recent add. That wasn't in the original rule. That kind of got added later.
Okay. Thanks so much. So Rhea, one for you. So, you've got the, if you will, kind of the 4 phases of the assessment that are coming in. And we get the question about, look, is this 100% pass fail on the assessment? And the reason I ask for this is can you give it some indication in your experience on kind of companies that have come to you for assessment? I guess what kind of, if you swag it, what percentage are coming to you too early and why?
Okay. Yes, that's a great question, Kevin. So we do actually, we've had quite a few customers come through and, they've gotten some kind of flow down or maybe they've seen, an email blast from a prime saying, oh, you guys all better be ready for CMMC. And so they come prematurely, they're looking to schedule their C3PAO assessment, but they don't have anything in place, right? So what they're doing is making sure that they're on the schedule, but they haven't even started on their SSP. And I mean, at that point, we do talk to them and we don't turn them away, but, we let them know that, in order to schedule anything, you really need to have, you need to be at least have a draft of your SSP and, maybe be able to walk through all of your 320 assessment objectives with someone. We do recommend that if they need help to look at RPOs that are in the marketplace or, any credible consultant that can help with that CMMC implementation. But we do get a lot of organizations that are kind of in that state where, they're a little bit, they're I don't know what to say, but they're kind of in that rushed state where they feel like they need to get everything in place but they don't have anything yet, and they just want to get on the schedule because they hear that there's going to be a backlog. And so we guide them in order to let them know that there's not a way to really get on our schedule unless you have an SSP or you have been working with someone. We also recommend going through that mock assessment so that they understand really where their deficiencies lie, and so that they're set up for a successful level 2 assessment when the time comes.
Great. So Mike, I'll kind of ask you that same question about, and maybe I'll broaden it just a little bit. So, as you go through the assessment process, you had mentioned that, well, look, if you don't have this, then the assessment's like over. What kind of when you determine that, kind of what's the steps to get the customer, do they get rescheduled? I guess the question I'll say, if somebody fails, what do they need to do to get back on track?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is probably the top concern. And to Ria's point, this is the value of doing the mock up front, right? Is because a lot of companies right now, this is the first time going through this. I've not done this before, right? So before I give you $40,000, $70,000, I don't want you to tell me I'm guaranteed to pass, but I would like some assurance that I'm going to make it through the process, because again, it's kind of a blind op for me. I don't know what to expect going through this. The things that are risk factors for us that we try to point out really early is the companies that we see struggle the most are ones that are going it alone, meaning they're not working with an established partner that we have in the ecosystem. And it is an ecosystem. It's a partner ecosystem. We all work together towards the same goal, right? Everybody wants the DIB secure. They're not working with a partner. They're trying to go it alone, and they are not going to go do a mock assessment. Those two indicators right there would flag kind of medium to high risk. Once we get into the assessment, we have to complete the assessment, right? It has to complete. It has to have an end. And that end, if it's unfavorable, doesn't get reported. So the numbers you don't see in the numbers that are reported is you don't see the ones that don't make it through the process, right? And I wouldn't call it a failure. Maybe it's a reset. Certainly the assessment can be completed. But if there are major gaps, then again, and in the assessments that I've done, there have been a few that have not gone well. There's no question that it was a miss. Like, it's not my interpretation versus their interpretation. Sure. It's like, oh, yep, we totally missed that. That was a big miss. Some we convert to mocks. Others, all will have to be rescheduled if they need another level 2 third party. That they're going to have to be rescheduled. Sure. And again, we try to make sure that they truly understand, what they missed. Obviously, we can't provide guidance on how to fix it, but we want to give them clarity on exactly where they stand, to increase the probability of success on the next one.
Okay. So we always get the question about cost, and I'm not going to ask you to quote anything, but what goes into determining the cost of a C3PA audit? Ria, I'll start with you.
Yeah, we get asked a lot. Really, the complexity of the assessment. If there are multiple sites that are involved, if we're going to have to go to various locations. Really, a lot of times too, the cost has increased because that the CMMC final rule required for CCAs. At least two CCAs to be as part of the assessment. So that was a big one too, but that's really what we're looking at. We're looking at, the complexity of the organization, sites and where we're going to have to visit. So that's what goes into really quoting for us, for NSF, what goes into quoting for an assessment.
Okay. Mike, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, just as Ria said, this is a formal assessment. It has to be done by specifically credentialed folks who have background checks through the DoD. They've gone through advanced training, right? There are 320 things that we have to check. We have to submit a spreadsheet to the DoD saying, did we examine, did we interview, did we test, what artifacts did we look at, how did we validate? And if you spend 10 minutes on each, that's about 55 hours worth of work times 2. Now you're getting into 110 hours worth. That's a full month's of work potentially. So there's a cost associated with conducting the assessment. That being said, there are things that you can do to drive that cost down. Like, again, control inheritance is a very, very good thing. If you're leveraging, partners that have CMMC level certified services, right? There's a little bit less of a burden there because we're just checking those things periodically and we're looking at what the customer responsibility is on the OSC side. You can reduce complexity. On-prem systems are going to drive more of a look. If you're hybrid and you're using multiple Active Directories or multiple authentication mechanisms, again, scope complexity can play into that. But all in all, we're finding out that it's taking about the same amount of time, from a small to a large is not that big. There was a thought that number of users really drives the assessment cost, and it's less about the number of users and more about the diversity of the assets. Like, if you've got 500 users all using company managed laptops, all using the same image, That's much easier to assess than if you've got 50 users and 10 of them are on Macs and 10 of them are on BYOD and 10 of them are on Windows and 10 of them are on, then it complicates things in terms of how we have to do it. But I think overall the market's getting much better at refining these costs. And it's just, look, the ROI should write itself. The business case should write itself. This is part of what it costs to play in the market. The DoD wants us to come by every 3 years and validate, and there's a cost associated with that. And so there certainly are things you can do to help yourself. And there's also it's not a race to the bottom either. If you're getting quoted for 24, 25,000, that would raise an eyebrow to me just as much as $110,000 assessment would.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, that concludes our presentation for today. Mike, Rhea, want to thank you so much for your participation. Really enjoyed it. Great information and great partnership as always. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate it.
Thank you guys. Pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Kim, I'll pass it back to you.
Great. Thank you. What a fantastic session to end the day. We've had a ton of information today. There was a lot of information in that session that we hear from customers all the time. So appreciate that session. We've just got one short final session, so hold on just a moment. But before we do, I feel like we need to wrap with maybe another CMMC joke or two just to round out the day. And I think we'll appreciate these. The assessor asked for proof of continuous monitoring, so we showed them our team's blood pressure readings. I like that one. And one more. Our biggest cybersecurity control is from, in our case at Exostar, Wade, who we met earlier today, saying absolutely not. So thank you all for your sticking with us today. We've had a lot of great information, and we appreciate your time that you've spent with us, and we wish you the best in preparing for CMMC. And please don't hesitate to reach out to Exostar as you're getting ready for CMMC. And now to conclude our summit, pleased to introduce Richard Addy, President and CEO of Exostar, who will share final thoughts and send us on our way. Thank you.
Kim, thank you very much. And also thank you to those that have participated this afternoon. It's been a great session. Also want to thank the presenters and facilitators. Great practical discussion in terms of getting through the journey. Just to recap, we've covered a lot of content in the time together. We started off with the evolving cybersecurity landscape, of course, what it takes to build an enclave, the importance of documentation, how to approach remediation, and what it means to prepare for an assessment. That's not a small journey, of course, for a session like this, so a lot of content to cover. What I hope you walk away with, though, is that although there's a lot of content, there is a path forward, and it's more manageable than it may have seemed at the outset. One of the key themes from today's in the CMMC, although CMMC itself can feel complex, but when you break it down into various steps or milestones, it becomes achievable. I guess to state the obvious, CMC isn't the finish line, of course. This is just the start of a longer journey in terms of strengthening our resilience as a market vertical, as a defense industrial base, and then the aspect of sustaining that security posture into the future. Of course, Exostar and our cohorts are here to help you on that journey should you need it. And then finally, I guess to summarize, CMMC isn't just about meeting a requirement. Of course, it's about building a confidence that your organization is prepared, resilient, and ready for the future. So with that, I will wish everyone a very good day, and thank you again for your participation. Goodbye.